Hello, everyone. Today we will learn about another case. The case of Vaughn family. The Vaughn family, a family of 5 that everyone believed had a perfect life, lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs to outsiders. They seemed like a happy and close-knit family. However, beneath this facade, their seemingly perfect life was about to take a dark and tragic turn that would shake everything to its foundation. Kimberly was born in Morris, Illinois, in 1972. Into a well-off family, she has a twin sister named Jennifer. Her family valued education and personal growth, so she attended a prestigious school, participated in sports, and was known for her friendly and sociable demeanor. Christopher Vaughn was born in St. Louis, Missouri, in 1974, and grew up in a modest, close-knit family with 2 brothers. As a child, he enjoyed soccer, hiking, camping, and spending time outdoors with his family. Kimberly and Christopher met in the early 1990s and quickly fell in love. However, Kimberly's parents were not supportive of their relationship due to concerns about Christopher's age, his lack of a stable job, and his less affluent background. Despite this disapproval, Kimberly and Christopher were determined to be together. In the summer of 1994, after Kimberly discovered she was pregnant, they got married. Despite their youth, they were eager to start a family. Their first child, Abigail, was born just 4 months after their wedding. A year later, they welcomed their second daughter, Cassandra, and 3 years after that, their son Blake completed their family. In the early years of their marriage, Kimberly and Christopher enjoyed a loving and joyful life together. Their children were talented and creative, excelling in both sports and music. Kimberly dedicated herself to being a homemaker, actively participating in her children's activities. Meanwhile, Christopher was growing a small cybersecurity business. After a few years, the family relocated to Washington and eventually settled in a quiet town in Illinois, where they bought a spacious home. Their beautifully decorated house even earned them a feature in a local newspaper. Eager for a new challenge, Kimberly decided to pursue a law degree. She enrolled in a local university and earned her degree just a month before tragedy struck from the outside. Their family appeared to embody the American dream. However, things were not as perfect as they seemed. Christopher's job frequently required him to travel, during which he began an affair with a woman. This affair lasted about a year before Kimberly discovered it, shaking their marriage to its foundation. Despite Christopher's betrayal, they chose to stay together for the sake of their children. But the strain on their relationship only grew. Kimberly couldn't shake her suspicion that Christopher was still unfaithful, and ultimately, her instincts were correct. Along with the emotional strain, Kimberly's health began to deteriorate. She struggled with severe anxiety, frequent migraines, insomnia, and even high blood pressure. Faced with these challenges, she decided to see a doctor. The medication prescribed to her became a regular part of her daily routine, and for about a year, she worked hard to manage her symptoms. In addition, Kimberly attended therapy sessions with a psychologist, where she discussed the increasing problems in her marriage. Despite this, she is still sociable, friendly, and energetic. In contrast, Christopher was seen by friends and family as a reserved introvert who rarely expressed his emotions. In June 2007, just before their 13th wedding anniversary, the couple planned a family trip to an amusement park in Springfield, Illinois. Christopher chose the destination, and the rest of the family agreed. Early in the morning, on June 14th, the Vaughn family set off in their SUV. A few hours later, a passing motorist found Christopher limping away along the highway. Covered in blood, he had a wound on his leg and calmly claimed that his wife had attacked him. However, his story became puzzling when he admitted he couldn't remember anything else, attributing it to a sudden loss of memory. According to Christopher, they were on their way to the amusement park when Kimberly began to feel carsick and asked him to stop. He pulled over and got out to check the roof rack. While he was outside, he heard an explosion, and everything went dark. When he regained consciousness, he found blood running down his leg and, in shock, ran away. Unsure of what had happened to his wife and children, a passerby picked him up, but he couldn't remember where they had parked the SUV. When police later found the vehicle, they discovered a tragic scene. Kimberly and her 3 children had all been killed. From that moment, private investigator Bill Clutter stated that Christopher Vaughn became the main suspect, accused of murdering his family and staging it to look like a murder. Take his own life. Kimberly had been attacked once in the head, and each child had been attacked twice. A witness claimed that Christopher said his wife had pulled the trigger, but his memory seemed to fail him. When he reached the hospital, he reportedly told a nurse that, "You should call my wife. She gets mad when I don't call her." After getting treatment, Christopher was taken to the police station, where he was interrogated for nearly 14 hours. He returned for additional questioning on June 14th, 15th, and 17th. During these extensive interviews, he mentioned that Kimberly had asked him to pull over because she was feeling nauseous. He explained that he stopped his car near a cell phone tower to check the back tires. After securing the strap on the topper, he got back into the car and noticed his leg was bleeding. He insisted he had no memory of anyone attack him or his family. When detectives suggested that Kimberly might have attacked him, Christopher quickly defended her, insisting that she would never hurt the children. He maintained that he only found out he had been attacked when a doctor informed him at the hospital. He appeared genuinely confused, insisting that nobody else was present and that Kimberly didn't have a gun. So he couldn't understand how the attack had occurred. As the interrogation progressed, the detectives told Christopher that his family was alive and asked him to explain what had occurred. At that moment, Christopher requested to speak with Kimberly directly. Throughout the questioning, he consistently denied any involvement in the attack, claiming he had no recollection of the events. However, he soon altered his story, stating that it was Kimberly who attacked him. This inconsistency only added to the confusion and made it difficult to trust his account of the tragic situation. Initially, many people supported Christopher, believing he could not be responsible for such a dreadful act and speculating that someone else might be involved. However, the police, who had witnessed the crime scene, were convinced that the murders were domestic and ruled out the possibility of other suspects. During subsequent interrogations, Christopher was unable to provide any new information, remained adamant about his story. He claimed that Kimberly might have killed their children, injured him, and then taken her own life. He even considered himself fortunate that the bullet had only grazed the soft tissue of his thigh. Avoiding any major blood vessels, he suggested that Kimberly's behavior was influenced by the medication she was taking and the strain in their relationship due to his infidelity. Christopher stated that his memory loss stemmed from shock, which also explained why he hadn't immediately alerted the authorities or emergency services from the outset. Investigators had been skeptical of Christopher's account. There was insufficient evidence to arrest Christopher at that time. The police continued their investigation, seizing Kimberly and Christopher's laptops and searching the family home. During the initial investigation, Christopher was not detained and even organized the funeral for his wife and children. The funeral took place on June 23rd at a local funeral home, where many people attended. Several guests noticed the palpable tension between the Vaughn and Phillips families. Just before the service was set to start, police arrived and arrested Christopher on charges of murdering his family. He remained calm and did not resist the officers. However, his parents were outraged, claiming that their son was not allowed to say goodbye to his family, although Christopher's guilt had not been established. Extensive media coverage led the Vaughn family to suspect that his arrest during the funeral was an attempt to attract more public attention. In contrast, the Phillips family viewed the arrest positively. Kimberly's mother, Susan Phillips, expressed relief, stating she was glad her daughter was no longer considered a suspect in the deaths of her children. When the investigation progressed, the investigators was discovered that Christopher had taken out a life insurance policy on Kimberly, which would pay him $1 million if she died. the more the police investigated. The more they believed Christopher was the main suspect in this tragic event. The investigation lasted over 5 years, during which Christopher remained in custody despite his constant claims of innocence. He faced serious charges that could have led to the death penalty if he had been convicted. He was assigned attorneys through a special program that provides legal defense for those facing capital punishment. Christopher's defense team worked diligently to shift the blame to his late wife, Kimberly. They presented evidence that she had various mental health issues, which were exacerbated by the marital problems stemming from Christopher's infidelity and her subsequent health challenges. They argued that the medication she was prescribed only worsened her condition, ultimately leading to her tragic actions. The situation may not be as unlikely as it seems, especially when considering the viewpoint of Robert Deal, a crime scene investigator involved in the case. Robert has publicly supported Christopher, arguing that the bullet trajectory and other forensic evidence actually indicate that Kimberly was the attacker. He believes that investigators were overly focused on one theory and ignored other possibilities whenever Robert proposed ideas that contradicted the official narrative. He felt dismissed. He claims that the police insisted Christopher was a criminal mastermind who could outsmart everyone, including the experts. According to Robert, investigators often altered their theories to fit the evidence instead of allowing the evidence to lead them to the truth. The defense team highlighted that some crucial elements of the state's forensic case did not withstand scrutiny. For example, the state contended that Christopher unbuckled his wife's seatbelt after attacking her, claiming that a large blood stain near the latch came from Kimberly's injury. However, DNA tests later showed that the blood actually belonged to Christopher. This evidence significantly undermined the state's theory. The defense presented additional evidence regarding Kimberly's situation. They pointed out that at the time of her death, she was taking medications, including nortriptyline and Topamax, to manage her migraine headaches just 2 weeks before her death. Kimberly had emailed Christopher, expressing that she had experienced a noticeable change in her personality and an increase in anxiety. Furthermore, her nortriptyline levels were found to be at the low end of the toxic range, suggesting that the medication could have negatively impacted her mood and behavior. The defense argued that these drugs might have caused her to act in ways that were uncharacteristic, possibly even leading to thoughts of self-harm or violence. The defense proposed that Christopher might have experienced dissociative amnesia, a condition that can occur after a traumatic event, which could explain his lack of memory regarding the tragic incidents. Dr. Todd Grande, a counselor specializing in personality disorders, addiction, trauma recovery, and assessments, noted that such cases are not uncommon. He explained that individuals can indeed lose their memory after a specific traumatic event. Like an accident, Dr. Grande remarked, "I've seen this many times. I have no doubt that it's a real condition," and citing instances following severe motor vehicle accidents. At this point, things were starting to look more promising for Christopher's case. However, just as hope was building, a significant change occurred. The state enacted new laws abolishing the death penalty. This change meant that Christopher lost the legal team funded by the Capital Defense Program. His defense team requested $250 to continue their work, but Christopher could not afford this amount. Consequently, he was assigned a public defender, and they had to begin his defense. From the ground up, Christopher's new defense team struggled to build a convincing case, especially after investigators examined his personal laptop, which had been taken during a search of his home. They discovered a large number of messages exchanged between Christopher and a Canadian man. The two had connected about 10 months before the incident on a social networking site and had maintained regular communication. Christopher confided in him about his dissatisfaction with his marriage, expressing a desire to escape family life and retreat to the wilderness. They talked about survival skills, camping, and living off the grid in isolated areas like forests, deserts, and mountains. At one point, Christopher even tried to persuade the Canadian man to help him fake his own death as a way to escape his responsibilities. He wanted to create a scenario where his wife, Kimberly, could collect the insurance money when the Canadian man declined to assist him. Christopher stated he would leave regardless, planning to abandon his job and urban life to vanish into the Canadian wilderness. Beyond anyone's reach, about a month before the tragedy, Christopher began talking about a woman. He said he was in love with her and wanted to take her with him when he escaped. The police found her, who worked as a dancer at a local strip club that Christopher often visited. They had dated for a few months, during which Christopher frequently expressed his dissatisfaction with his family life. He even suggested that they run away together, but she dismissed the idea as silly and declined. Additionally, it was revealed that Christopher had been seeing another dancer as well. He had lied to her, claiming he was single and had no children in order to impress her in his desire to start anew. Christopher spent a lot of money and proposed that they escape to another country together. With the new evidence presented, Christopher could no longer deny his involvement, especially after significant changes were made to his defense team. The trial of Christopher Vaughn began in the fall of 2012 and quickly attracted media attention. Throughout the trial, compelling evidence emerged. Christopher had purchased a weapon shortly before the tragic incident and had practiced at shooting ranges multiple times. Including the night before the family trip, forensic experts determined that the bullet wound on Christopher's thigh was inflicted at nearly point-blank range, contradicting his claim that his wife, Kimberly, attacked him while he was outside the car and she was inside. Another critical piece of evidence came from bloodstains found on Christopher's clothing. Prosecutors argued that if Christopher had genuinely left the car before any violence occurred, there would be no reason for his wife's or children's blood to be on his clothes. Even more incriminating was the absence of Kimberly's blood on the murder weapon or on her hands, which would have been expected if she had attacked herself in the head. Instead, investigators found a drop of Christopher's blood on Kimberly's thumb, indicating she had been in close contact with him after he was injured. Further examination of Christopher's work computer revealed even more damaging evidence. He had researched methods for staging a crime scene. This information painted a clear picture of his involvement in the brutal murders of his wife and children. Kimberly's doctor was an important witness in the trial, stating that despite being prescribed medication for insomnia, headaches, and high blood pressure, Kimberly had never shown any desire to harm herself or others. The defense tried to challenge this evidence, but the jury ultimately found Christopher Vaughn guilty of the brutal murders of his entire family. He received 4 life sentences, 1 for each family member, without the possibility of parole. Shortly after the sentencing, Christopher made an unexpected claim that he had clearly remembered the details of that tragic day and had never actually lost his memory. He stated that the gunshots occurred after he got out of the car and that he then saw the bodies of his children. According to him, his wife attacked him in the leg while yelling that it was all his fault before turning the weapon on herself to end her life. This new account was deemed ridiculous and did not affect the jury's decision, despite the significant evidence against him. Christopher's parents continued to advocate for his innocence publicly. For years, they appeared on talk shows, gave interviews, and managed blogs and social media accounts that depicted their son as a victim of a troubled marriage. They also blamed Kimberly's family, claiming her relatives never accepted Christopher and made his life difficult from the start. The Vaughn family submitted multiple petitions seeking clemency, hoping for Christopher's acquittal or a reduced sentence. Many of these petitions went to the state governor, who, after reviewing the case, stated he found no reason to question the court's decision. The governor noted that murdering a family member is among the most egregious crimes and assured there would be no leniency in this case. With all this information, is Christopher really the killer? Official reports said the weapon wound was in the thigh, very close to the genitals, and could have been fatal. However, he also attempted to escape to the wilderness without his wife, a detail that could suggest a possible motive. Furthermore, while in prison, Christopher reportedly wrote a 140-page notebook focused on his life, but he didn't mention his wife or children. Instead, his writing centered on his relationships with other women, which seems strange. Hello, friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rebecca Payne. Rebecca Charlotte Payne was born on April 19, 1986, in New Milford, Connecticut, to Virginia and Nicholas Payne. She grew up as an only child and graduated from New Milford High School in 2004, where she was active in sports, playing field hockey, track, and tennis. After high school, Rebecca pursued a degree in athletic training at Northeastern University in Boston. The 5-year program focused on preventing and treating athletic injuries. During her 4th year, she became a leader on campus, serving on the Dean's Council and as president of the athletic training club. Rebecca was known for her friendly and outgoing personality, making it easy for her to connect with people from all walks of life. She was always willing to lend a helping hand, which earned her many friends. Her life was tragically cut short when she was found dead in May 2008. The news shocked her friends and left them wondering who could have committed such a heinous crime. The police investigation revealed that there were no signs of forced entry at her home, suggesting that Rebecca may have known her killer and possibly let them in voluntarily. Rebecca's apartment, situated on the 3rd floor, consisted of 2 bedrooms. One of these rooms was where Rebecca lay face down on the floor, lifeless. The trail of blood leading from the living room to this bedroom suggested that the attack had occurred in the living room. This theory was later confirmed by forensic experts who found casings at the scene and determined that Rebecca had been shot 5 times. The bloodstains in the apartment indicated that Rebecca was initially conscious and managed to crawl to the bedroom, but her strength eventually gave out. The detectives' task was to identify the person responsible for such brutality. They quickly ruled out the possibility of a theft gone wrong, as Rebecca's valuables remained untouched. The apartment was in disarray, with scattered belongings. However, the detectives suspected that the perpetrator intentionally created this mess to mislead them. Alternatively, the mess could have been a result of Rebecca's struggle to resist her attacker. During the investigation, officers noticed that both the balcony door and the front door were open. Furthermore, signs in the 2nd bedroom indicated that someone else had lived there. After speaking with the apartment manager, they discovered Rebecca didn't live alone, but shared an apartment with a fellow student. This new information led the police to search for the student. The police also questioned everyone living in Parker Hill Apartments, trying to find any leads. The attack on Rebecca was loud and brutal, with 5 gunshot wounds. It was surprising that many residents heard a woman screaming and gunshots between 3 and 4 a.m., but none of them called the police. This lack of action is known as the bystander effect, or Genovese syndrome, a psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to help a victim when others are present. During the police investigation, a 1st-floor resident reported seeing a black SUV approach the building on the night of the crime, although he couldn't see the license plates or who got out due to the darkness. The apartment complex had security cameras both inside and outside, which may have captured evidence of the crime. Investigating Rebecca's murder, detectives sought CCTV footage from the building to aid their inquiry. They requested the footage from the building manager, but he revealed that the cameras only operated in real time, and recording required a video cassette and manual activation. Unfortunately, no one had recorded the footage. This discovery led investigators to suspect the building manager, who had found Rebecca's body and had unrestricted access to her apartment as a resident of the building. They thought he might have taken advantage of the lack of surveillance to commit the crime, possibly under the cover of darkness. The police explored all avenues, and their suspicions about the manager intensified after a background check revealed his prior issues with the law related to illegal substances. Furthermore, another detail caught the police's attention. During their investigation, the police noticed dark red stains on the front door of the apartment complex manager's apartment. They collected a sample of the stain and sent it to the lab for analysis. Meanwhile, the manager was taken in for questioning at the police station. The investigators asked him numerous questions, trying to determine if he was hiding any information or if his story would change, but he denied any involvement in Rebecca Payne's death. The manager claimed he had spent the entire night in his apartment with his wife, and she corroborated his alibi when questioned by the police. However, the investigation was put on hold until the lab results came back. Once the report confirmed that the stains on the door were just paint, the manager was released due to lack of evidence. While reviewing video and photo evidence from the crime scene, detectives became interested in a specific card used to pay for public transportation in the Boston area. Since each use of the card was recorded in the system, including the location and time of use, the transit police provided the detectives with CCTV footage related to Rebecca's case. After examining the recordings, detectives discovered that the card had been used by Rebecca. Rebecca was walking home, calm and alone, with no one following her, so the initial footage didn't provide any leads in the case. A few days later, investigators obtained another surveillance video from a camera outside the hospital near the Parker Hill apartments. This recording showed a black SUV driving by at the same time as Rebecca's attack, matching the witness's description. Although the footage was poor quality and the license plate was not visible, they were able to identify the car as a Ford. The detectives then brought Rebecca's roommate in for questioning to determine if she had any connection to the incident. The woman was shocked by Rebecca's murder and cooperated with the investigators. She had a solid alibi, having moved in with her parents to study for an exam, which her parents confirmed. Although she was cleared of suspicion, she provided useful information. She revealed that Rebecca's boyfriend, Matt, had access to their apartment. The investigators wondered if Matt had a motive to kill Rebecca and contacted him. Matt claimed he had left Boston to live with his parents in New York State around the time of the attack. Although Matt seemed depressed by his girlfriend's death, the investigators were convinced it was an act. Matt's parents confirmed his alibi, but a phone record showed Matt had spoken to Rebecca on the phone around midnight, just hours before her death. But the investigation into Rebecca's murder hit a dead end after Matt was cleared due to cell tower evidence, placing him at his parents' house in New York State at the time of the crime. Years went by with no leads, leaving Rebecca's parents without answers about their daughter's tragic death. However, a breakthrough came in 2012 when the Boston police arrested Anthony White on drug trafficking charges. With a long prison sentence looming, White offered a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would reveal crucial details about the night Rebecca died. The investigators saw this as a potential break in the long-dormant case and agreed to the deal. After discussing it with the prosecutor, White recounted that on May 20, 2008, he received a call from Cornell Smith, a fellow drug dealer and acquaintance. Smith wanted to meet up and arrived at the designated location with their mutual friend Michael Balba, who was driving a black SUV. The three of them drove to the Parker Hill apartments, where Balba parked in a spot with a clear view of the apartments. According to White, when Cornell Smith spotted Rebecca through a third-floor window, he exclaimed, "That's her." They waited for a while, watching until the lights in Rebecca's apartment went out, indicating she had likely fallen asleep. Under the cover of darkness, Smith proceeded to climb from the first-floor balcony to the second and finally to the third, where he entered through the open balcony door. Rebecca was not asleep, but rather lying on the couch in the living room when she encountered the intruder. She began screaming, and a brief struggle followed. Cornell Smith then fired 5 shots at her before fleeing the apartment through the front door and driving away. Investigators were skeptical of White's account, suspecting that he fabricated the story based on news reports to secure a lighter prison sentence. The officers were baffled by the motive behind the murder. Why would Cornell Smith kill Rebecca, who was unrelated to his world? But White's next statement shocked and disturbed them. According to White, Rebecca's death was a case of mistaken identity. On the first floor of the Parker Hill apartments lived two sisters who resembled Rebecca. These sisters, who were also illegal drug dealers, were Smith's rivals. In 2012, Cornell Smith was already serving a 12-year prison sentence for selling drugs, which he had been convicted of 2 years prior. Following White's testimony, Cornell Smith was also charged with Rebecca's murder, but he denied any involvement. Before Cornell Smith's court appearance, prosecutors were dealt a devastating blow. Their key witness, Anthony White, had died in prison. Without White's testimony, the case against Smith was in trouble, as there was no physical evidence linking him to Rebecca Payne's apartment. However, investigators had another lead, Michael Balba, who was in the car with White and Smith on the night of the crime. Detectives located Balba and discovered that he owned a black Ford Expedition SUV, which matched the vehicle caught on surveillance camera and the witness's description. Balba was arrested and taken into custody, but he denied any involvement in the case and requested a lawyer. Despite having no concrete evidence against him, investigators hoped that Balba's connection to the crime could still lead to justice for Rebecca. Investigators examined his court file related to drug trafficking. What they found was astonishing. Smith had written several letters to the judge presiding over his trial, and one of them implicated him in Rebecca's murder. In the letters, Smith portrayed himself as superior to others. Although some of the content was nonsensical, one letter stood out as crucial evidence. In it, Smith wrote about an altercation that had taken place in downtown Boston, which ultimately led to Rebecca Payne's tragic death at his hands, a fact he boldly admitted to, stating, "I, Cornell Allen Smith Sr., was responsible." It's unclear why these letters hadn't raised red flags earlier, especially since they were addressed to the judge. The letter proved that Cornell Smith was in Rebecca Payne's apartment at the time of her murder. The trial took place in 2015. Throughout the trial, the district attorney emphasized that Rebecca was an innocent victim with no connection to Smith or his accomplice, Balba. Payne expressed frustration and sadness, saying that seeing Cornell Smith, the person responsible for his daughter Rebecca's death, is a painful reminder of the tragedy and hinders their ability to move forward. Despite Smith's guilty plea and 18 to 20-year prison sentence, Payne emphasizes that nothing can change the fact that Rebecca is gone forever. The judge ordered Smith to face Rebecca's loved ones, acknowledging the immense pain he caused. Her hometown dedicated a tennis court, garden, and scholarship fund in her name to keep her memory alive. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Cassie Farrington. Born on December 22, 1990 in Virginia, Cassie Marie Brooks was the second oldest of 4 children to Chuck and Darlene Brooks. She excelled in school, became a member of the National Honor Society, participated in sports, and aspired to become a doctor. However, everything changed when she got pregnant at 16. She had to adjust her plans, and in 1 month, she graduated from high school, gave birth, married Bradley Farrington, and moved out of her parents' house. Years later, Cassie had a second child, but her marriage began to deteriorate. At 22, she got divorced. With her 2 children, she lived in Silver City, a town where she worked as a nurse at a local hospital and rented a place from a coworker. By the time Cassie turned 23, she had entered a new romantic relationship with a man named David Barry. He quickly formed a strong bond with her 2 children, which brought her great joy. Cassie and David took their time building a life together, and she was thrilled to report to her family and colleagues that he brought happiness and stability to both her and the kids. On March 24, 2014, Cassie phoned her parents after finishing her night shift at Silver City Hospital. During their conversation, she outlined her plan for the morning, driving home, picking up the kids, taking them to school, and then returning home to rest for a few hours before picking them up again later that day. Cassie was supposed to pick up her kids from school, but she didn't show up even after their classes had finished. School staff tried to reach her, but couldn't, so they called her parents. Her mother, Darlene, tried to call her too, but there was no answer. Darlene thought maybe Cassie had just overslept after working a night shift, so she asked Sherelle, Cassie's landlord, to check on her. Sherelle went to the house, knocked on the door, and called out Cassie's name, but got no response. She then went around to the back door, looked through the window, and saw water pouring out of the bathroom into the kitchen. Sherelle knocked on the door again, louder this time, and shouted Cassie's name, still with no response. She used her own key to unlock the door and entered the house, where she heard the sound of running water getting louder. As she walked through the wet kitchen towards the bathroom, she continued to call out Cassie's name, her voice starting to shake. When she finally saw Cassie, her worst fears were confirmed. Cassie's body lay face down in the overflowing bathtub, water still pouring out. Sherelle found her and pulled her out of the water, placing her on the floor. Unfortunately, it was too late to try CPR, her body indicating Cassie had been dead for several hours. Sherelle quickly called 911 to report the situation, and paramedics and police were dispatched to the house. She also had the difficult task of informing Cassie's parents of their daughter's passing. While waiting for help to arrive, Sherelle searched the house and discovered another bathtub, also overflowing with running water, suggesting a possible accident or intentional act. The tub had a feature to prevent overflow, so the extra water flowed into the drain instead of spilling onto the floor. Sherelle noticed that the towel rack, which was previously mounted on the wall, was now lying on the floor, having been torn off. Meanwhile, Chuck and Darlene, who lived in Arizona, immediately dropped everything and traveled to Silver City after receiving the news. A couple of hours after receiving the devastating news, Cassie's parents arrived at the house where her body had been found. The police were already on the scene, and they noticed that there was no evidence of break-in. The doors and windows were locked, and the glass was intact. Additionally, valuable items that might have attracted a thief were left untouched. The police chief's first question to Cassie's parents was whether their daughter had been suicidal or had any reason to take her own life. Cassie's parents, Chuck and Darlene, were adamant that their daughter would never do such a thing, especially not with young children depending on her. Despite their protestations, the police chief repeated his suggestion that Cassie's death was likely a deliberate act. The police investigation was remarkably brief, lasting only a few hours, which struck Cassie's parents as unusual. Typically, the police take days to thoroughly examine the scene of a tragedy. In this case, they seemed eager to wrap things up quickly, even telling Sherelle that she could reuse the house soon. This hasty approach only added to Cassie's parents' growing unease, prompting them to decide to investigate the house themselves. When Cassie's parents drained the bathtub, they were surprised to find water still in it. They also discovered a series of black streaks on the tub's sides, similar to the marks left by rubber-soled shoes on the floor in various areas. Additionally, they found Cassie's glasses, hairband, and a coat hanger. Given these discoveries and the lack of fingerprint evidence collected by the police, Chuck and Darlene suspected that the authorities might be trying to quickly close Cassie's case as non-criminal. However, a call to the district attorney's office prompted the police to appear more diligent in their investigation. The medical examiner's report ultimately prevented the case from being closed. It revealed that Cassie's body had multiple bruises, including those on her neck. The forensic medical examiner concluded that her death was a homicide caused by an unspecified mechanism of injury. Unfortunately, the crime scene was no longer of significant use due to the property owner's subsequent cleanup and renovations. As a result, the police were unable to uncover new leads, leaving Cassie's parents with no updates on the case for months. David Barry, who had been in contact with Cassie before her death, was quickly cleared as a suspect due to his solid alibi. As time went on, Cassie's parents, Chuck and Darlene, grew increasingly frustrated with the local police, feeling they were not doing enough to investigate their daughter's death. After meeting with the chief district attorney, Chuck and Darlene requested that action be taken against Detective Jose Sanchez, who was handling the case. The district attorney reviewed the case file and agreed that Sanchez had made several mistakes. As a result, Sanchez was removed from the case and a more experienced detective was assigned. The new detective focused on the person Cassie's family and close friends had suspected from the start, her ex-husband, Bradley Farrington. Cassie and Bradley were in a bitter dispute over their children's custody at the time of her death. Given the court's likely ruling, it's probable that the children would have remained with their mother. Bradley stood to gain the most from Cassie's death, as it would grant him custody of the children and release him from his child support obligations. Bradley Farrington became a suspect in Cassie's death investigation. Having quit the force just months prior, Bradley had a motive for the crime. Moreover, his law enforcement background gave him the necessary expertise to manipulate the investigation and conceal evidence. Unfortunately, the bathwater had erased any potential DNA evidence and destroyed the shoe prints on the floor. Any incriminating evidence that may have linked Bradley Farrington to the crime scene was irreparably lost due to the incompetence of the local police. The only remaining option to hold Bradley accountable was through eyewitness accounts. Cassie told her parents that Bradley had often been abusive to her and the children, and that he had even mocked her, suggesting she try to report him to the police. As a Silver City police officer at the time, he felt invincible and above the law. It's heartbreaking to imagine Cassie's desperation, knowing she couldn't seek help from the police because her abusive husband's friends were part of the force. At her workplace, she confided in coworkers about Bradley's threats, including his chilling warning that he would make her disappear and no one would ever know. But in the end, 19 months later, on October 23, 2015, Bradley Farrington was arrested and charged in connection with her death. Bradley stood trial for Cassie's murder. At the trial, the prosecution presented multiple witnesses, including Cassie's parents, friends, and coworkers, who all testified about the abuse Cassie had suffered at the hands of her police officer husband. Additionally, Dr. Michael Hunter, a leading forensic expert from San Francisco, testified, assessing the conclusions drawn by local experts. Hunter, an experienced professional with over 20 years in his field, presented autopsy photographs to the jury and concluded that Cassie's neck injuries suggested she was likely strangled to death. Former Detective Sanchez, who initially handled the case before retiring, was subpoenaed to testify in court. He stated that he never considered Bradley Farrington a suspect during the initial investigation, as there was no evidence to warrant it. Sanchez also revealed that no fingerprints were collected from the crime scene. Sanchez expressed his suspicion that the crime scene had been intentionally cleaned up after the fact, which would explain why no fingerprints were found. After deliberating for 4.5 hours, the jury found Bradley Farrington guilty on September 7, 2018, and sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 30 years. In 2020, Farrington appealed his conviction to the New Mexico Supreme Court. He argued that the trial court had improperly allowed friends, family members, and co-workers of the victim to testify about statements Cassie made regarding his threats and acts of domestic violence. The state's highest court has upheld Bradley's conviction, ruling that there was sufficient evidence to support it. The court also rejected Bradley's appeal against the hearsay testimony that was allowed during his trial. Bradley is currently serving his sentence in prison. His children are now in the care of his parents, who are restricting their contact with the family of the victim. Hello. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Autumn Tagert. Autumn Tagert was a single mother living in Windsor, a city on the border between Michigan, USA, and Ontario, Canada. In 2018, Autumn and her 9-year-old son Gavin spent a Saturday with Gavin's father, Chris, from whom Autumn had amicably separated. They all went grocery shopping together, and later Chris dropped them off at their third-floor apartment. That evening, Chris left for his own home, and Gavin spent quality time with his mother, playing video games before bed. As he drifted off to sleep, he was awoken by a strange noise. Opening his eyes, he was startled to see an unknown man standing in his room. The man instructed Gavin to close his eyes and go back to sleep before disappearing into the hallway. Gavin's room was adjacent to his mother's, which was on the right-hand side of his room. Approximately a minute after the stranger left his room, Gavin heard his mother's scream. Overcome with fear, Gavin had never felt such terror before. The screaming eventually stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the apartment. Exhausted and shaken, Gavin eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, Gavin woke up and immediately went to his mother's room. Everything in the apartment was smashed and destroyed. Gavin found his mother lying on the bed. At first, he thought she was asleep, but when he saw the blood on her nose, he realized she was dead. This discovery shocked him. Gavin couldn't contain his emotions. He broke down in tears and decided to seek help. He entered his mother's room, took her phone, and messaged his father, Chris, via the Messenger app. Gavin sent a message saying that Autumn wouldn't wake up. Chris and his girlfriend immediately drove to Autumn and Gavin's home. Upon arrival, Chris got out of the car and saw his son standing behind a glass door on the third floor. Since Chris didn't have an electronic key to enter the building, Gavin went downstairs to let him in. Chris asked Gavin to stay with his girlfriend while he checked on Autumn. When Chris entered the apartment and then the bedroom, he was met with a devastating sight. Autumn was lying pale and still. Autumn's body showed signs of severe trauma, with bruises on her face and body and a bloody nose. He immediately called 911 and police and paramedics arrived at the scene. Unfortunately, the paramedics were unable to save her and she was pronounced dead. The police investigation began, and experts searched the apartment for evidence. A child specialist interviewed Gavin, who reported that a man had told him to go to sleep the night before. Gavin said he heard his mother screaming, but the screams stopped after a while. He described the man he saw in his room as a white male of average height with messy hair, who appeared disheveled, as if he had just gotten out of bed. Gavin estimated the man was slender, but not extremely thin. The autopsy revealed that Autumn's death was caused by strangulation, and forensic experts found evidence that she had been physically assaulted before her death. Additionally, the examination showed injuries in her genital area and the presence of male DNA on her body. Initially, the police considered the possibility that the killer was one of the building's tenants. However, Gavin reported that the man he saw on the night of the crime was not a familiar face. Furthermore, the investigation showed that the perpetrator not only needed an electronic key to enter the building, but also to enter Autumn's apartment. Yet, there were no signs of forced entry on the door to her apartment. The police initially considered two possibilities: that Autumn had let the perpetrator in herself, or that she had left the door unlocked. However, they soon discovered evidence that suggested the perpetrator had actually climbed to the third floor. The perpetrator first accessed the second-floor balcony and then climbed up to the third floor, where the door was open, allowing them to enter the apartment without difficulty. On the night of the crime, a witness reported seeing a new black SUV, possibly a Honda Pilot, in the parking lot next to the building. The SUV was there until around 6 a.m. Detectives suspected that the owner of the SUV might be connected to the victim's death. They believed that the perpetrator may have used the SUV as a stepping stone to climb into the building and then used the decorative protrusions on the building's corners as a makeshift ladder to climb from the second floor to the third floor. The crime occurred at night, which made it easier for investigators to analyze mobile phone activity in the area where Autumn lived. One of the active phone numbers belonged to Autumn's neighbor, Michelle, who lived in the same building. During the initial police interview, Michelle claimed she didn't know anything about the crime. However, phone records showed that she had been on the move around the city, making calls from different locations, and had turned off her phone around the time of the murder. Although the exact location of Michelle's phone couldn't be pinpointed due to some margin of error, it was clear that she was either in or near her apartment at the time of the crime. The detectives suspected that Michelle was hiding something and decided to question her again. During the second interview, Michelle continued to deny any knowledge of the crime. However, the police warned her that withholding information could make her an accomplice to the crime. Faced with this possibility, Michelle began to open up. She revealed that a man named Jay had contacted her boyfriend and her around 2 a.m. on the night of the crime. Jay wanted to purchase an illicit substance and also hire an escort. To begin, Jay, Michelle, and her boyfriend went to an ATM where Jay withdrew cash. Michelle and her boyfriend then provided Jay with a portion of the substance, which Michelle admitted they were selling themselves. Later, Jay asked to buy more of the substance. Michelle instructed Jay to drive to the parking lot near her building, where she and her boyfriend planned to rob him. Upon arrival, the three of them used the substance together. Afterwards, Michelle and her boyfriend decided to flee. Before escaping, Michelle hid a bag of the banned substance in her genital area. This detail will become important later. Michelle reported that she and her boyfriend fled the scene, taking both the banned substance and a portion of Jay's money with them. They ran to the building's entrance and then proceeded to her apartment, where they locked themselves in, remained quiet, and kept the lights off. Jay was unable to enter the building because he didn't have an electronic key. From Michelle's apartment window, they observed shoe marks on the roof of Jay's car. The man left the scene around 6 a.m. Investigators believe that Jay attempted to enter the building to find the individuals who had stolen from him. However, since Jay didn't know Michelle's address, it's likely that he mistakenly entered Autumn's apartment instead. The police now had the suspect's phone number and photo, which were obtained from security cameras at the bank where he withdrew cash to purchase the banned substance, as well as from an ATM camera. After investigating the phone number, authorities discovered that the individual's name was not Jay, but rather Jitesh Bhogal, a 27-year-old Canadian citizen who worked as a car development engineer in Warren, Michigan. He owned a black Honda Pilot SUV and frequently visited Canada, crossing the border via bridge or tunnel to get to Windsor. Authorities tracked his movements and found that he had left Canada on the morning of June 10th, the day Autumn died, and had not returned to the country since. When the police released information about the black SUV seen at the victim's house, Jitesh sold his car, which raised suspicions. The Canadian police contacted their American counterparts and learned that Jitesh was planning to move from Michigan to Washington State, where his parents lived in Kent. This decision to give up his job and move back to his parents' house, get rid of his car, and stop visiting Canada was highly suspicious. However, the police needed concrete evidence to arrest and extradite him to Canada. The Windsor police requested assistance from the U.S. National Security Agency to aid in the investigation and track the suspect's movements. To confirm that the male DNA found on Autumn's body belonged to Jitesh, they needed to obtain a sample of his DNA for comparison. U.S. agents monitored Jitesh's activities, aware that he was planning to move to Washington State and potentially flee to a third country. Jitesh attempted to alter his appearance by shaving off his beard and wearing blue contact lenses. But Jitesh was not cautious enough. During a visit to a bar in Warren, he left behind a glass after finishing his drink. Agents seized the glass, which provided them with a DNA sample. Although the comparison process took time, The result was not unexpected. The DNA sample from the glass matched the male DNA found on Autumn's body, confirming that it belonged to Jitesh Bogle. On August 17, 2018, more than 2 months after Autumn's death, Jitesh was arrested at his parents' home in Kent, Washington. The Canadian police charged him with the murder of Autumn Tagert. Due to restrictions in the country, the trial was postponed for a significant period of time and eventually began in November 2021. To maintain social distancing, the trial was held in 3 separate courtrooms. The main courtroom contained the judge, prosecutor, jury, and the defendant, along with his defense team. The 3 other courtrooms had large screens broadcasting the trial so that Autumn's relatives and others could watch. Jitesh Bogle entered a not guilty plea for the crime of taking Autumn's life, saying it was an accident. He explained that some dealers had stolen money and an illegal substance from him, running out of his car after committing the crime. This upset him, so he got out of the vehicle to try to find them. Due to the large amount of alcohol and substances he had consumed, he did not remember much of what happened that night. Jitesh said he remembered climbing onto the balcony before entering the apartment where Autumn lived. When he entered her apartment, he saw her asleep in her bed, but he mistakenly thought she was Michelle, the person who had robbed him. When Autumn woke up and started screaming, Jitesh told her to be quiet, but she didn't stop. In an attempt to quiet her, Jitesh covered her mouth, which ultimately caused her to suffocate. Jitesh said that when the screaming stopped, he realized what had happened and tried to revive Autumn by performing CPR, but unfortunately, it didn't work. Jitesh did not recall how Autumn's genital injuries occurred or how he left her apartment. His lawyers asked the prosecution to drop the first-degree murder charges, arguing that the crime was not premeditated. They believed that Jitesh was not in control of his actions due to the large amount of substances he had consumed. The fact that he placed his hand over her mouth was more consistent with an attempt to silence her than with an intent to kill. Bogle's defense team argued that he was not responsible for the death of Autumn Tagert because he was intoxicated and did not have the capacity to form intent or understand the consequences of his actions. They stated that his behavior was the result of intoxication and that he did not intentionally cause the death. The defense team questioned the reliability of the DNA evidence, suggesting that it could have been contaminated by John Lorda, a forensic expert who worked on the case. They argued that Lorda's actions, including rotating the body on the bed sheet, could have transferred DNA or fluids from the body to the sheet or vice versa, resulting in cross-contamination. Lort testified during cross-examination that he followed proper procedures to prevent cross-contamination of evidence. He changed gloves between handling each piece of evidence and taking photographs. Lort's examination of evidence in Tagert's room included a search for fluids such as urine, saliva, and semen, as these are common indicators of sexual assault in cases involving a deceased female victim. The prosecutor disagreed with the defendant's version of events. The prosecutor pointed out that the defendant had previously searched for substances in the same area of Autumn's body where Michelle had hidden them, which suggested that the defendant was aware of the substances and had intentionally committed sexual assault. The prosecutor stated that the defendant's actions were disgusting and constituted sexual assault. Jitesh Bogle disagreed with the prosecutor's assessment. When asked why he didn't call for emergency services when Autumn stopped breathing, Bogle explained that he was afraid of being arrested because he didn't think anyone would believe him. Bogle admitted that he didn't remember much of what happened in Autumn's room, but he did recall performing CPR on her after she stopped screaming. Gavin, Autumn's 13-year-old son, also took the stand during the trial. To make the experience less intimidating, he testified from a separate room in the courthouse, accompanied by a support worker. From this room, he shared his account of the events that occurred that night. On December 1, 2021, a 12-person jury delivered a guilty verdict to Jitesh Bogle for first-degree murder. The jury did not find sufficient evidence to prove that Bogle had intercourse with the victim, Autumn. Autumn's father, John Tagert, expressed relief and satisfaction with the verdict, stating that it was the right outcome for Autumn and her son, and that the family had finally received justice. On January 5, 2022, the court sentenced Jitesh Bogle to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years to be served before he can apply for parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nicole Lobb. On August 19, 2014, at 5 p.m., the Portland Emergency Services received a distress call from a man reporting a woman stabbed in the chest at the Timber Creek Apartments. The victim, who was still alive but struggling to breathe, needed immediate medical attention. The eyewitness requested an ambulance be sent to the scene as soon as possible. When paramedics arrived, they found the victim. Despite the paramedics' best efforts, she succumbed to her injuries. Before passing away, she shared crucial information. The man who made the 911 call explained that he and his wife were walking down the stairs towards the parking lot when they heard a scream. He looked to his right and saw a woman running towards them, crying out, "He stabbed me! He stabbed me!" The victim told them that she didn't know her attacker, but described him as wearing camouflage pants and a black hoodie. The manager of the Timber Creek Apartments identified the victim as 29-year-old Nicole Lobb, a leasing consultant who had been working at the complex for a few weeks. On August 19th, Nicole was driving a golf cart to deliver lease renewal letters to residents, along with a balloon and a popcorn package. She marked each apartment on a map as she made the deliveries. The investigation revealed that the attack likely occurred in a specific stairwell at Timber Creek, known as Breezeway. This conclusion was based on Nicole's notations and the map she had marked. It is believed that the attacker was waiting for her under the stairs, as several indicators pointed to this location, including a trail of blood drops and scattered leaflets at the foot of the stairs. During the investigation, several witnesses reported seeing a suspicious young male wearing a black hoodie and cam pants in the area around the time of the attack. By combining the reports and timelines of each sighting, detectives were able to piece together the path the suspect took into and out of Timber Creek. The Washington County Search and Rescue Team searched the woods along Cedar Mill Creek, which runs through the Timber Creek apartment complex. They found several items during their search and sent them to a laboratory to see if they were relevant to the case. The police contacted Chris Lobb, Nicole's husband, to inform him of the incident. Chris and Nicole had a blended family, including 2 daughters from his previous relationships and a son together. Nicole was a strong and resilient person who had overcome cancer as a teenager. She developed a passion for fitness and bodybuilding and competed in several events. Her dream was to become a coach and help others achieve their fitness goals. The attack on Nicole was not a robbery, and Tinoco did not attempt to remove any of her clothing. This suggests that the motive behind the attack may have been personal. As a result, detectives began to focus their attention on her husband, Chris. Nicole was a beautiful woman, a loving wife, an amazing mother, and a devoted friend. She was unafraid to share her faith and opinions with others, and her goal was to make the world a better place. Her legacy lives on, and it's clear that she achieved her goal. She touched the lives of everyone in the room in ways that will have a lasting impact. The police interviewed residents of the Timber Creek Apartments and found 2 witnesses who saw a man in a black hoodie and cam pants matching the suspect's description running across the road during the time of the attack. The witnesses saw the man running towards the houses across the street from the Timber Creek Apartments, not looking around, and with a hood over his head. Using the witnesses' descriptions, detectives created a sketch of the suspect and quickly distributed it throughout the city. A sketch of the suspect was shown on TV. Detectives also worked with informants, gathering several potential leads, including one from a man whose son knew someone named Taylor. According to the man who reported Taylor, he had been threatening people with a knife in recent weeks. The police located Taylor and brought him in for questioning. During the questioning, investigators found his statements unusual and suspected he might be suffering from a mental illness. When asked about Nicole Lobb, he openly admitted to taking her life. However, Taylor's confession was inconsistent, repeating information from the news and inventing unrelated details. As a result, police excluded him from their list of suspects. Another potential lead emerged involving a man named Nick, who had a history of crime. Nick had some physical characteristics similar to the suspect in the sketch, but his past behavior didn't suggest he was capable of a crime like the one committed against Nicole. Despite having a history of run-ins with the law, Nick had never been known to physically harm anyone. When police brought Nick in for questioning, he denied any involvement in the crime and requested a lawyer. The police then obtained a search warrant for Nick's home, where they found a black hoodie and camouflage pants. However, the hoodie didn't match the witness's description because it had a prominent white logo on the front. The police sent the clothes to a lab for further analysis, but experts found no evidence linking them to the crime. The police obtained Nick's mobile phone records, which provided conclusive evidence that he was not at the crime scene when Nicole was attacked. This eliminated Nick as a suspect, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 3 weeks after Nicole's death, on September 13, 2014, the Eugene Police Department received a call came from Eugene, the second largest city in Oregon. On the night of the 13th, Heather Miller, a 39-year-old woman, was attacked as she was leaving a bar near Autzen Stadium after watching a game. Tinoco, identified as Jamie Tinoco, was publicly named by the police, who released his photo in the hopes that other victims would come forward. Detectives investigating the death of Nicole Lobb noticed a resemblance between Tinoco's photo and their suspect sketch. Further investigation revealed that Tinoco lived with his parents in an apartment directly across from the Timber Creek apartment complex where Lobb had died. This geographical proximity strengthened the suspicion that Tinoco might be responsible for her death. Detectives questioned Tinoco about his potential involvement in Lobb's death, hoping he would confess, just as he had done in a separate case involving Heather Miller. However, Tinoco denied any involvement in Lobb's death and refused to cooperate. As a result, the police had to gather evidence to link Tinoco to the crime. With his parents' apartment located directly across from the Timber Creek complex, the police obtained a search warrant. During the search, they found a black hoodie and cam pants in Tinoco's room, which they sent to the lab for analysis. The lab report results with no DNA match found. While there's no concrete evidence linking Tinoco to Nicole's death, he's clearly responsible for attacking Heather Miller and showed no remorse, even taking pride in his actions during his trial. In a new interrogation, investigators used Tinoco's ego to their advantage, suggesting that if he confessed to Nicole Lobb's murder, he would gain respect from other inmates in prison. The detective implied that owning up to the crime would make him appear more formidable, rather than just a coward who attacked a woman from behind. After a brief silence, Tinoco began to open up about Nicole. He claimed that he didn't intend to kill her, but rather wanted to experience the feeling of stabbing someone. According to Tinoco, his goal was to hurt Nicole, not take her life. He described how he had seen Nicole parking a golf cart and carrying a balloon in a small package to an apartment on the second floor of Timber Creek, which is located near his apartment. Nicole was attacked when she went upstairs and then came back down. Tinoco hid behind a golf cart, then ran to the stairs and stabbed Nicole when she descended. He chose Nicole because she seemed like an easy target. When questioned about his intentions, he admitted that he had considered forcing Nicole into a sexual act, just as he had done with Heather Miller. However, he claimed that he didn't follow through with this plan because Nicole screamed loudly after being stabbed, prompting him to flee the scene. During a reenactment of the crime, Tinoco demonstrated how he escaped from the scene. Chris Lobb, Nicole's husband, was shocked to learn that the person responsible for his wife's death was only 17 years old. As a father of a 13-year-old daughter, Lobb found it incomprehensible that someone just 4 years older than his daughter could commit such a heinous crime. The trial started in 2015. Tinoco confessed to the crime during the interrogation, but he claimed he was innocent in court. His lawyer argued that there was no DNA evidence linking Tinoco to the crime scene. The lawyer asked for mercy for Tinoco, who was 17 years old and severely mentally ill, and hoped that treatment could help him change his behavior. The defense presented only one witness, a psychologist who evaluated Tinoco and found that he exhibited symptoms of schizophrenia. However, another psychologist from the Oregon State Hospital disagreed, saying that Tinoco had a personality disorder, not schizophrenia. The jury was convinced of Tinoco's guilt after watching a video of his confession and an experiment where he recreated his actions at the time of the crime. Jamie Tinoco provided details during a reenactment of Nicole Lobb's crime that only the perpetrator would know. This led to a guilty verdict on all counts in 2017. The jury was tasked with deciding Tinoco's sentence, choosing between life without parole or life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. However, they found insufficient mitigating circumstances to warrant the option of parole, resulting in a sentence of life without parole. Before the official sentencing, Circuit Judge Kristen Thompson allowed Tinoco to speak. With his attorneys by his side, Tinoco apologized and asked for forgiveness. Chris Lobb, Nicole's husband, recalled that Tinoco's family approached them after the sentencing to offer condolences and apologize. However, in 2021, the Oregon Court of Appeals overturned Tinoco's conviction, citing changes in juvenile laws. At the time of the crime, Tinoco was automatically referred to adult court due to the nature of the offense. New reforms now allow for offenders between 15 and 17 years old to be tried in juvenile court, rather than being automatically referred to adult court. A new law requires prosecutors to request a hearing to decide if a juvenile's serious crime case should be moved to adult court. This change affects the overturned conviction of Tinoco in the Nicole Lobb case. Although Tinoco remains in prison, his defense may try to reduce his sentence if he's retried and reconvicted. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Christina Ann and Thompson Harris. Christina Ann Thompson, 30, and Jason Thomas Harris, 40, had been married since 2003 after dating for about 5 years. They had their first child in 2009, and their lives changed significantly. Despite the challenges of everyday life, they seemed happy with their new life as parents. Christina took care of their child and the household, while Jason worked at a plastics factory. As their child grew up, Christina had the opportunity to contribute to the family budget by getting a job. However, in May 2014, she had to take maternity leave as she was expecting her second child. On September 29, 2014, Jason left for work and exchanged a few words with Christina, who was not feeling well due to a cold. Despite her poor health, she assured Jason that she was okay. A few hours later, Jason called his wife to check on her, but she didn't answer the phone. This sparked worry in Jason, as he couldn't understand why Christina wasn't answering his calls. Jason couldn't reach Christina, so he asked a neighbor to check on her. He told the neighbor that Christina was sick and wasn't answering her phone. The neighbor went to the house, knocked on the door, and called out to Christina, but no one answered. Since the door was unlocked, the neighbor went inside and found Christina lying on the bed. She couldn't wake Christina up, so she called 911 and then got a neighbor who was a registered nurse to help. The nurse checked Christina's pulse and confirmed that she had passed away. On September 29, 2014, 4 months after giving birth to her second child, Christina was found dead in her house. When the police arrived, Jason was already there. He told them that Christina was sick and he had left her alone in the morning. 2 days later, the medical examiner determined that Christina's death was caused by an overdose of a prohibited substance. This news shocked her family and friends. Christina, a mother of 2 young children, was found dead, and many people who knew her were shocked. They claimed she had never used illegal substances. Her mother, Kathy May, reported to the police that Christina was fine when she saw her the day before her death, contradicting her husband Jason's statement that Christina was struggling with a cold. Kathy May also revealed that Christina described her marriage to Jason as complicated. Jason was unhappy in the marriage but didn't want a divorce because he didn't want to pay child support or lose custody of their children. The neighbors who had discovered Christina's body shared some information with the police. Apparently, Jason told them that on the evening before Christina's death, he made her cereal with milk, and while eating, she lost consciousness and dropped the plate. The police understood that it was hard for Christina's loved ones to accept that someone they knew well might have a hidden dark side. However, as the investigation progressed, the police began to doubt that Christina had used any illegal substances. Christina's family refused to give up, and they didn't believe the story. Christina's family, particularly her mother and sisters, urged the police to test her breast milk for evidence. Initially, the police delayed this request for 48 hours, but the family's persistence eventually led them to comply. This marked the first time in Michigan's history that breast milk was used as evidence in a case. Tests conducted at her workplace and the hospital where she gave birth to her second child came back negative for prohibited substances. At the time of her death, her second child was just 4 months old, and Christina was still breastfeeding both children. According to her husband, Harris, and her mother, Christina was meticulous about what she consumed because she was breastfeeding and wanted to ensure her baby's health and safety. Christina had been pumping and storing her breast milk in a freezer, with some of the frozen milk stored at her mother's house. Investigators tested 3 bags of breast milk for prohibited substances, using the dates on the bags to determine which ones were frozen before her death. The results showed no traces of banned substances in any of the milk samples. This finding suggested that Christina had not taken the substance that caused her death. Only one person, Jason's sister, had claimed that Christina had used banned substances. This statement led investigators to take a closer look at Jason and consider the possibility that Christina's death was intentional. The investigation was slow, and it's unclear how it would have progressed without the active involvement of Christina's family. Her mother, Kathy May, kept in close contact with the Davidson police, reminding them about her daughter's case. In August 2016, almost 2 years after Christina's death, Kathy May was able to get the Davidson police to turn the case over to the Michigan State Police. With new investigators on the case, the story began to unfold, revealing more information about Jason Harris's behavior before and after his wife's death. Harris was involved in multiple extramarital affairs, and Christina was aware of these infidelities. She had confided in family members and co-workers about the situation, including the fact that Harris was texting another woman while she was in the hospital giving birth to their youngest child. Christina had expressed concerns about her safety, telling a co-worker that if she died, Harris would be the one responsible. When asked if she was serious, she confirmed that she was. Harris had made public statements that questioned the paternity of their second child and had complained about Christina's behavior after giving birth, saying she was depressed and refusing to work. He also complained about her nagging him. A co-worker of Harris's reported that he had made disturbing comments about Christina, including expressing a desire for her death. This co-worker described the relationship between Harris and Christina as toxic, citing frequent arguments between they. The most alarming aspect of this case is that Harris was open about his desire to get rid of Christina, and he even took steps to harm her. Unfortunately, His words and actions were not taken seriously until it was too late. Harris had attempted to poison Christina on at least 2 occasions by mixing substances into her drinks. Fortunately, Christina was able to detect the unusual taste and avoided drinking the beverages. Harris asked a coworker for a substance that would not affect the taste or smell of food and drinks, explaining that he wanted to poison Christina so she wouldn't feel anything. When he told another coworker that Christina didn't drink the water with the substance because it tasted funny, the coworker refused to give him more pills. A coworker testified that Harris told him he wanted to stop Christina from nagging him, but the coworker thought he was joking. Harris also told a coworker that he had hired someone to kill Christina, but the person was arrested before they could carry out the task. Harris then asked the coworker to kill Christina in exchange for $10,000, which would be paid from a $100,000 life insurance policy Christina had through her employer. The coworker refused the offer, believing that Harris was just venting his emotions and that the offer to kill Christina was a joke. He remembered the conversation as Harris saying something like, "I'm tired of her. I'm going to get rid of her." Back to the case, the 911 operator asked the neighbor who found Christina's body if there were any needles at the scene, but the neighbor did not see any. The neighbor, a registered nurse, testified that Christina's body was cold and stiff, had no pulse, and had a white foamy substance coming from her mouth. The neighbor did not attempt to resuscitate Christina because she was already dead. The paramedics who responded to the scene confirmed that Christina was dead. Harris told his supervisor that he had asked a neighbor to check on Christina and that he had to go home because she was unresponsive. However, witnesses reported that Harris did not appear concerned or in a hurry when he arrived at the house. Harris entered the house without speaking to the neighbor he had asked to check on Christina. Later that morning, Harris contacted Christina's supervisor at work and informed her of Christina's death. He also inquired about collecting the $100,000 life insurance policy benefit that Christina had through her job. One of the women Harris was in a relationship with told investigators that Harris contacted her on the day of Christina's death and said that his wife had died from taking too much of a banned substance. This suggests that Harris knew the cause of Christina's death before the medical examiner's report was released. Harris shared some details about the night before Christina's death, including her restless sleep, frequent coughing, and unusual comment about the chemical taste of her water. He later visited her workplace to inquire about life insurance proceeds, collecting a $20,000 death benefit and raising suspicions with his actions. A mistress also moved in with him and his children, either before or after her funeral. The mistress stated that Jason Harris's adult children from a previous marriage moved into the house just days after Christina's death. Police also found that Jason Harris had bought an airline ticket to Rhode Island 9 days after Christina's death to visit a woman he had exchanged over 5,800 texts with. The county medical examiner, Dr. Brian Hunter, submitted post-mortem blood and urine samples for testing. Although the test results were consistent with a lethal dose of the substance, there was no evidence of how the substance was administered, as there were no injection marks on her body and no powder residues or rolling paper were found near the scene of her death. Michigan State Police took over the investigation in 2016. Dr. Hunter changed the manner of death from accidental to homicide after a wrongful death action. Jason Harris was charged with first-degree murder and others. His bail was denied. Harris pleaded not guilty and will contest the charges. The prosecution eliminated the possibility of injection as the cause of death because there were no injection marks or a needle found at the scene. Dr. Judge testified that it was unlikely the substance was inhaled through the nose because there was no evidence of a rolled dollar bill or paper used for snorting. When given the opportunity to speak, Jason Harris did not apologize or express remorse. Instead, he claimed he was innocent. The jury did not believe his claims and found him guilty of the charges against him. On November 17, 2021, the jury delivered a guilty verdict for 47-year-old Harris. 3 weeks later, the court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kira Trevino. Kira Trevino was born on November 19, 1982, in Des Plaines, Illinois, to parents Marcy and Jay Trevino. They remembered her as a vibrant, dedicated, and kind-hearted person. At the time of her disappearance, Kira worked at 2 stores in the Mall of America, Wet Seal and Delia's. Her co-workers were not only close friends, but also like family to her. Kira had a remarkable ability to recognize people's hidden strengths and had a promising future ahead of her. However, her life took a tragic turn when she mysteriously vanished on February 21, 2013. On the day she disappeared, Kira had a shift at work and was looking forward to a dinner date with her husband, Jeffrey Trevino, at a nice restaurant after her shift ended. Kira and Jeffrey had met 3 years prior and quickly fell in love, eventually getting married. To those around them, they appeared to be a happy and stable couple, with only occasional disagreements that they kept private. Neither their relatives, friends, nor co-workers were aware of any significant issues in their relationship. On Saturday, February 23rd, Kira's co-workers became concerned when she failed to show up to work. She was known for being punctual, strict, and adhering to her schedule. When they couldn't reach Kira, they called her husband Jeffrey. According to Jeffrey, Kira had left their house the previous morning and hadn't returned. While this wasn't entirely unusual, as Kira would occasionally spend the night at a friend's or relative's house without warning, the severe snowstorm that day was a cause for concern. Jeffrey speculated that Kira's car might have gotten stuck and her phone battery could have died, leaving her unable to communicate. Jeffrey filed a missing persons report for his wife Kira after not hearing from her, and he also contacted her family to inform them of her disappearance. Her family was shocked and deeply disturbed by the news. Upon receiving the report, detectives launched an investigation into Kira's disappearance. As is standard procedure, they began by questioning Jeffrey and searching the surrounding area. Detectives visited Jeffrey at his home to ask him about Kira's disappearance. He told them that on the previous Thursday, he and Kira had spent time together, having dinner, talking, bowling, and then leaving the mall. According to Jeffrey, they went straight home after that, where Kira planned to watch a movie. Jeffrey also reported that Kira left their house the following Friday morning around 8:30 a.m. to attend a mandatory work event. He stated that Kira was acting normally and didn't appear to be behaving strangely before she left. Jeffrey wasn't concerned about Kira's frequent disappearances, despite not knowing her whereabouts. They had minor relationship issues, but Jeffrey didn't consider them serious. When questioned, he dismissed the possibility of Kira having a lover, citing a previous conversation where she denied it. Jeffrey claimed to trust and love his wife. Investigators relayed information to patrol units and visited the Mall of America to verify Jeffrey's testimony. The Mall of America in Bloomington is one of the largest shopping malls in the world. As such, the mall is equipped with multiple security cameras. Detectives investigated Kira's disappearance by reviewing the footage from the time she left work on February 21st. The footage showed nothing unusual. Jeffrey's account was confirmed, as the footage showed that he met Kira after work, and they spent time together at the mall before leaving. There were no signs of arguments or trouble. Kira's family was struggling with her disappearance, and their anxiety grew as the days passed. They decided to take action and travel to Bloomington to help with the investigation. They created flyers with her picture and posted them around town, hoping to attract attention to the search. The investigators questioned neighbors and obtained footage from a security camera that partially captured Kira and Jeffrey's home. Kira's cell phone records also became available, revealing a significant new lead. A man named Ryan Wendt, a manager at a store where Kira worked, with whom she had a long-term and intense relationship. Police investigated Ryan after learning he'd traveled out of state during Kira's disappearance, raising suspicions due to his past romantic relationship with her and their concurrent out-of-state moves. Detectives sought to determine whether his actions were coincidental or incriminating. The detectives managed to locate Ryan in Colorado and asked him to answer questions. During the questioning, Ryan stated that he had last been in contact with Kira via text messages while driving through South Dakota. He said these messages were sent shortly before Kira disappeared. The police analyzed the timing of these messages and discovered that Kira had been texting with Ryan while she was having dinner with Jeffrey. It was clear that Kira was distancing herself from Jeffrey. The investigators examined Ryan's phone and credit card records to verify his location. Their analysis indicated that Ryan was indeed out of state that evening and had no connection to Kira's disappearance. Based on this information, Ryan was eliminated as a suspect. Further analysis of the messages revealed that Kira had been texting with Ryan even after she returned home with Jeffrey. However, her phone activity ceased at 11:44 p.m., and she has not been active since. A team of investigators reviewed video footage from a surveillance camera at Kira's neighbor's house. The camera's rapid movement made it difficult to observe, but it did capture Jeffrey and Kira's house for a few seconds. According to Jeffrey, they returned home after dinner and bowling, watched a movie, and went to bed. However, the footage showed Kira's car backing into the yard at 2 a.m. and driving away, despite the poor video quality and constant motion. Jeffrey claimed he drove to the gas station to fill up Kira's car, as she had asked him to do before her commute the next day. His alibi checked out, as he was indeed seen at the gas station around 3:30 a.m. However, after leaving the gas station, he didn't return home. Instead, he headed towards the highway, but his exact destination is unknown. Although a neighbor's camera didn't capture him returning home, it's possible he may have arrived when the camera was facing a different direction. Kira's Chevrolet was seen leaving her residence at 9:21 a.m., but the driver's identity couldn't be determined. A missing person report was filed on February 23rd. On February 25th, police received a call about a suspicious vehicle near Kira's workplace. The vehicle had been parked in a multi-story parking lot for several days and was found with suspicious red smudges on the trunk lid. Kira's white Chevy was found with signs of a tragic event, including a few small bloodstains. Her purse, containing divorce court forms, was recovered from the vehicle. A rolled-up trunk mat with dark stains, later confirmed to be her blood, was discovered behind the car. The car left the house at 9:21 a.m. and was captured on camera at the mall 20 minutes later. Unfortunately, there was no camera in the parking lot where the car was eventually found, but there was a camera that captured footage of the path leading to the car. After reviewing the footage, detectives noticed a man wearing a hoodie, which was not unusual given the cold weather, walking after the car had entered the parking lot. The man crossed the street and approached a taxi stand, where he had a brief conversation with a driver before getting into the car and driving off. The police were able to identify the taxi company and determine which car the man had ridden in by tracking the time of the interaction. Since the cabs were equipped with GPS tracking devices, the police were able to determine that the man ended his trip a block away from Kira and Jeffrey's house and paid for the ride in cash before getting out of the car. As the cab drove away from the neighborhood, it was caught on camera by the same surveillance camera that had partially captured Kira and Jeffrey's residence. 2 minutes later, a man wearing a hoodie with a distinctive white logo entered the camera's frame. Although the poor video quality made it hard to discern his face, investigators suspected that the man was likely Jeffrey, given that Kira was missing and the man with the hooded sweatshirt was seen entering Kira and Jeffrey's house. Law enforcement officers executed a search warrant and visited the house, finding numerous dark red stains in the bedroom including nearly 100 on the mattress. After rearranging and cleaning the room, investigators used luminol to reveal additional stains on the carpet that were not visible to the naked eye. The stains, which originated in the bedroom, were confirmed to be Kira's blood, leading investigators to believe she was likely no longer alive. A search of Jeffrey's car found no blood or signs of a struggle, but a gas station receipt indicated a purchase was made with his card 1 hour and 40 minutes before Kira's car was abandoned. Detectives went to the gas station to review the security footage. The footage showed Jeffrey filling up his car and then going inside to withdraw cash from an ATM. This gave them a clear view of Jeffrey's face and revealed a logo on his jacket that matched the one seen on the man in the earlier footage. Based on this new evidence and the evidence found at the house, 39-year-old Jeffrey Trevino was arrested. He was taken to the police station for questioning and became the main suspect. Jeffrey contacted his attorney during the interrogation and was advised to remain silent. The police had enough evidence to charge him, but needed to find Kira's body to prove his guilt. After months of searching by the police, Kira's family and volunteers, a suspicious bag was found by the side of the road at Keller Lake, near Trevino's house, as the snow began to melt in late March. A bag containing a bloodied pillow, shirt, and bra was discovered, and forensic analysis revealed that the items had Kira's DNA on them. Although the search of the lake was hindered by the presence of ice, divers searched the water body, but unfortunately, no remains were found. The area around the lake was also thoroughly searched using 4 trained search dogs, but these efforts were unsuccessful. 2.5 months after Kira's disappearance, a disturbing call on May 8, 2013, led police to a body in the Mississippi River. Body was identified through dental records as Kira Steger, with severe blunt force trauma and a fractured index finger, making her exact cause of death impossible to determine due to decomposition. To uncover the truth, investigators worked to rebuild the sequence of events surrounding Kira's death. Their theory was as follows. When Kira and Jeffrey arrived home, he discovered that she was texting someone else, which made him suspicious. Kira refused to let him see the messages, leading Jeffrey to violently take her phone and break her finger in the process. Upon reading the romantic messages, Jeffrey's anger intensified, ultimately driving him to kill Kira. After committing the crime, he attempted to erase any evidence of his wrongdoing. Jeffrey used Kira's car to transport her body to a house, where he put it in the trunk. He then stopped at a gas station before driving to a river, where he disposed of the body. On his way back home, he threw away a bag containing Kira's pillow and clothes. The next day, he went to a gas station to withdraw cash from an ATM, knowing he would need it to pay for a taxi after abandoning Kira's car in a mall parking lot. After getting rid of the car, Jeffrey returned home and spent the rest of the day cleaning the house. Jeffrey's goal was to make it seem like Kira had driven away from her car on her own that morning and was unharmed. However, surveillance footage foiled his plan. In October 2013, a jury found Jeffrey Trevino guilty, agreeing that his actions were not planned in advance, but rather the result of a heated argument that escalated into violence after he discovered Kira's infidelity. Jeffrey Trevino was sentenced to 27.5 years in prison in November 2013. He will be eligible for parole in 2031. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Diane Holik. Diane Tammy Holik was born in 1958 in New York City and was known to her friends and family as a hardworking and joyful person. Her work ethic led to financial stability and her successful career. For over 20 years, she worked at IBM, a leading global technology company. In 1996, she relocated to Austin, Texas, where she held a senior position that allowed her to work remotely from her home office. Diane purchased a luxurious home in the suburbs of Austin and lived a privileged life, often hosting wine tastings, dining at upscale restaurants, and frequenting dance clubs. She was also involved in charity work and made efforts to improve her personal life. However, her life took a turn in mid-November 2001 when a severe storm warning was issued for Texas, bringing heavy rain and tornadoes to the Austin area. As a result, Diane worked from home on the morning of November 16th, but suddenly became unresponsive during a scheduled work call. Diane had multiple phones, but she wasn't answering any of them. Her co-workers left messages asking her to call back, but when she didn't respond, they grew concerned. They contacted the police department and requested that someone check on Diane at her home. When the officers arrived, Diane's neighbor offered a spare key, allowing the police to enter the house. Inside, they found an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of dogs emerging from the kitchen. As the police searched the house, they found Diane's body in the bedroom on the second floor. The detectives were called to the scene, and they were struck by the unusual cleanliness of the crime scene. There were no signs of theft, struggle, or forced entry. Diane's body was fully dressed and lying next to her bed. The detectives quickly realized that they were dealing with a crime. The investigation revealed distinct strangulation marks on Diane's neck, likely caused by a rope or similar object. Her wrists also showed signs of being bound with cable ties. The cleanliness of the house, the lack of stolen valuables, and the absence of forced entry led the detectives to believe that Diane's killer was someone she knew and trusted. They suspected that the killer was someone she had let into her home voluntarily. An investigation into Diane's death revealed no signs of forced intimacy, but detectives did find suspicious dark spots and red stains on the carpet near the bedroom entrance. A towel on the back of the sofa in the living room caught their attention due to its mismatch with the otherwise clean and orderly surroundings, prompting them to send it to the laboratory for examination. Diane's acquaintances reported that she had no known enemies, and the police discovered that she was in a romantic relationship with Dennis Conley, a man she had plans to spend her life with. Diane had been married before, but that marriage ended quickly. She met Dennis through a dating service, and he had 2 children from a previous marriage. Dennis was a businessman living in Houston, 150 miles from Austin, where Diane resided. Despite the distance, Diane and Dennis formed a close bond, with Dennis proposing to her after 2 months with a valuable platinum ring. However, according to Diane's friends, the relationship began to decline recently. Diane had been feeling controlled by Dennis at times. Diane was also troubled by the decision to relocate to Houston, which meant leaving her home in the suburbs of Austin. She put her house up for sale, but realtors struggled to find a buyer willing to pay the asking price of $435,000. This led detectives to suspect that Dennis might be involved in Diane's death, prompting them to invite him to the police station for a conversation. Dennis agreed to speak with them without a lawyer. The medical examiner determined that Diane died sometime between 3 p.m. on November 15th and 3 a.m. on November 16th. Notably, the wedding ring Dennis had given her was missing from her finger, while her other jewelry remained untouched in the bedroom. This raised questions about the killer's motives and whether the ring was removed to mislead investigators. During the police interview, Dennis appeared to be a grieving man. He was asked about his relationship with Diane and his whereabouts on the day of her death and the day her body was found. Dennis claimed he was in Houston at the time. He stated that he last spoke with Diane on the morning of November 15th and spent the rest of the day at work without contacting her again. When he couldn't reach Diane the next morning, he left a message on her voicemail. The police took Dennis' fingerprints and DNA sample, but ultimately cleared him as a suspect after verifying his alibi. He had not left the city, so the detectives had to expand their search for a new lead. Further inquiry revealed that an unknown man had inspected Diane's house a few days before her death, claiming to be a potential buyer. He had planned to return with his wife to make a joint purchase decision. This clue became a top priority for the police, who began questioning the owners of properties for sale in the area, hoping that someone may have seen this mysterious buyer. Several women in the area reported that a suspicious man had visited their homes around the time of Diane's murder. He, described as being 35 to 45 years old with a large nose and dark hair, had arrived unaccompanied by a real estate agent. 6 of the women refused to let him in, but one allowed him to enter and view her home. She who let him in reported that he acted strangely, showing no interest in the layout of the house or its features. Instead, he specifically asked to see the bedroom on the 2nd floor. When she became uncomfortable and asked him to leave, he introduced himself as Walter Miller. The police searched their databases for anyone matching the name Walter Miller, but the individuals they found did not match his age or appearance. A forensic artist created a sketch of the suspect based on the women's descriptions. Diane's killer removed the cable ties that had bound her hands, but the rationale behind this action is unclear. Did he know his victim personally? A subsequent autopsy revealed no evidence of forced intimacy or assault, yet the police remained vigilant, returning to the crime scene to search for potential traces of semen. However, these efforts yielded nothing. A police sketch of a potential suspect in the Diane Holik case was broadcast on the evening news, urging anyone who recognized the person to come forward. One of the few leads investigators had was a towel from Diane's house with a few short hairs on it. But the hairs were rootless, making it impossible to obtain a complete DNA sample. A woman contacted the police after seeing the sketch and reported a similar encounter. She and her husband had put their house up for sale 6 months prior, and a man had come to visit, claiming he wanted to buy the house for cash and needed to see it first. However, she refused to let him in, and he left. 2 months later, the same man returned to her doorstep and introduced himself as Jim Taylor. She was home alone with her young daughter, as her husband had just left for work. He asked to look around the house, but she denied his request again. This time, he became angry and aggressive, yelling and demanding to be let in. She immediately recalled the encounter and remembered writing down his name and the license plate number of his minivan. The police now had a crucial lead to investigate. A search of the vehicle's registration revealed that the owner was not Jim Taylor, but Patrick Anthony Russo. Initially, Russo seemed like an unlikely suspect. He was a married man with 2 children, lived 40 minutes outside of Austin, and was a member of a church music band. However, a deeper look into his past revealed a disturbing history of violent crimes against women. Russo had been convicted of a series of attacks, including one that involved abducting and attempting to strangle a victim with cable ties. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison but was released on parole after serving only 8 years. While in prison, he met his future wife, Janet, a church volunteer. The police found it hard to believe that Russo's connection to the case was mere coincidence. The police visited Anthony Russo's house with a search warrant, and he seemed unsurprised by their arrival. Although they found no evidence of Diane's belongings, including her ring, in his house or minivan, a neighbor reported seeing a similar vehicle at Diane's house on the day she died. In the utility room, investigators discovered cable ties identical to those that left marks on Diane's wrists. However, these ties are widely available at hardware stores. The police asked Anthony to come to the station for further questioning, where they inquired about his whereabouts on November 15th and 16th. Anthony claimed that on the 15th, he drove to Austin to visit a religious radio station but was unable to enter because no one answered the door. Notably, the radio station was near Diane's house. He stated that he left the station around 4 p.m. but got lost due to a hurricane, arriving home around 6 p.m. This alibi is questionable, as the forensic medical expert reported that Diane died between 3 p.m. and 3 a.m. Russo was questioned by the police about whether he was looking to buy a house. He claimed he had not inquired about any properties for buy, which would later prove to be an important statement. When shown a photo of Diane, Russo remained impassive and denied having met her. With no evidence connecting him to the crime, the police had no choice but to release him. However, when detectives investigated further by visiting a radio station Russo had mentioned, they discovered that his previous statement was a fabrication. The employees at a local business explained that they didn't lock the doors during a tornado warning because a large crowd had gathered in the lobby. Meanwhile, a woman who was selling her house contacted the police after encountering a man who resembled the suspect in a recent crime. She had been at home with her child when he came to her door, claiming to be interested in buying a house. He was holding a pamphlet with real estate listings, including her own home. She allowed him into her home, but when she showed him a bedroom, he attempted to attack her. However, he quickly fled when he heard her child crying in the next room. She retained the pamphlet, which was later given to the police. They found a clear fingerprint on the pamphlet, which belonged to Anthony Russo. Russo denied ever looking at houses for sale, but the fingerprint proved he had lied to the police. Russo's false statement was a misdemeanor, and since he was still on probation, it was a violation of his parole conditions. The police arrested him, fearing that he might flee while they searched for evidence linking him to the death of Diane. To ensure public safety, the authorities decided to keep Russo in custody. The police were able to locate 15 women who had showed homes to a man who matched Anthony Russo's description. All 15 women were asked to identify the suspect from a lineup of 5 men who were similarly dressed and had similar appearances. However, only 10 of the women were able to positively identify Russo as he who had visited them to view homes. The remaining 5 women were unable to make an identification. Despite this, the police still had reason to believe Russo was involved in the crime and brought him in for further questioning. During the interrogation, Russo continued to deny any involvement in the crime, but eventually stopped answering questions and requested to see his wife. Meanwhile, the police received the results of a DNA analysis from the laboratory. The results showed that a hair found on a towel at the victim's home matched Russo's DNA profile. While this was a significant piece of evidence, it was not conclusive, as there was a small chance that the hair could have belonged to someone else with the same DNA profile. Despite the accumulation of circumstantial evidence, the police still lacked a direct link between Russo and the victim's death. Investigation revealed 2 key pieces of evidence that implicated in Diane's death. Firstly, cell phone data placed Russo in the same area as Diane on the day she died. Secondly, a thorough examination of Russo's home computer uncovered a disturbing search history. Russo frequently visited an adult website where he consumed content explicitly depicting strangulation during intimate activities. Furthermore, the website required subscription, indicating that Russo actively sought out this material and was willing to pay for it. 2 days prior to Diane's death, Russo had accessed a particular story on the website that told the tale of a man who, under the guise of being a buyer, infiltrated a lonely woman's home, strangled her, and then stole valuables to make the crime appear as a robbery, thus disguising his true motive of satiating his desire for strangulation. Detectives delved into Russo's financial life and found he and his wife had a mere $2,000 in savings and were still making mortgage payments on their current home, clearly indicating he was in no position to buy a new house. Without concrete evidence, police arrested Russo and charged him with the murder of Diane Holik nearly 2.5 years after her death, which took place on November 15, 2001. In court, 14 women testifying under oath that Russo had approached them about viewing homes, often visiting them in person on the day of the murder. Notably, these women all matched a specific profile, suggesting Russo had been observing them beforehand. While most refused him entry, one woman allowed him in initially but soon asked him to leave due to his strange demeanor. Russo's interest in homes was not random, as he specifically sought out homes occupied by women of a particular age group. The prosecution presented evidence that Russo visited homes for sale, often targeting women who lived alone. Russo visited Diane's house again, likely at her invitation, but this time with a specific intention. He had planned his actions carefully to avoid leaving any evidence. On a rainy day, Diane offered him a towel to dry off, which he casually discarded on the back of the sofa. As she showed him around the house, Russo attacked her on the second floor. Prosecutors believed that Russo derived pleasure from the act of strangulation, which ultimately led to Diane's death. Before leaving the scene, Russo took cable ties and Diane's wedding ring, which were never found by the police. He used a spare key hidden at the front door to lock up behind him. This was the prosecution's version of events. At the trial, Russo's current and former wives testified that he had a history of enjoying the act of strangulation. It's worth noting that Russo had a prior conviction for a similar crime. After deliberating for 11 hours, the jury found Patrick Anthony Russo guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, but never admitted to his guilt, despite his history of similar crimes. Russo will become eligible for parole again and can submit his initial petition in 2044. At that point, he will be approximately 80 years old. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Kristen Trickle. Kristen Trickle was born on August 14, 1993, in a small town in southeastern Nebraska. However, her early childhood was marked by turmoil. Her biological mother abandoned the family when Kristen was just 3 years old. Despite the challenges, Kristen's father, James, raised her on his own, providing for her every need. Unfortunately, James struggled with a severe and worsening illness. Tragically, he passed away when Kristen was 16 years old. As a result, Kristen was at risk of being sent to a shelter until she turned 18, as there were no other close relatives to care for her. Fortunately, Kristen's aunt and uncle, who lived in Kansas, stepped in to provide a loving home. Although they already had 3 children of their own, they were willing to take in their orphaned niece and give her a comfortable and happy life. Kristen met Colby, a talented young musician, at church. At 18, Colby was already skilled on the guitar and wrote his own songs. He was passionate about building a successful music career. As they spent more time together, Kristen and Colby's friendship blossomed into a romance. Colby's charming personality and musical talents captivated Kristen, and he often wrote songs for her. He was outgoing, friendly, and had a way of making people feel at ease. After graduating from high school, Colby's interests shifted towards the military. He enlisted in the U.S. Armed Forces at 18 and went on to serve for 3 years, establishing a solid military career during that time. Colby maintained a close relationship with Kristen, frequently calling and corresponding with her. At 21, he made a surprise decision to join the reserves, returned home, and proposed to Kristen, who happily accepted. They got married in April 2014. After their wedding, Colby and Kristen settled in Hays, Kansas, where Colby completed his college education and pursued a music career, albeit with limited success. He performed at local events and parties, playing cover versions of popular songs. They had 2 dogs, which they loved dearly, and many people considered their marriage to be happy. However, tragedy struck 5 years into their marriage. On Halloween Eve, October 31, 2019, at around 4 a.m., a distress call was made to emergency services. The caller, who identified himself as Colby Kristen, reported that his wife, Kristen, had shot herself in the head with a revolver that was kept in their home. When medical help and the police arrived at the scene, a young man opened the front door for the officers, but stayed outside himself. Inside, the team found Kristen, who appeared to be surprisingly calm despite the severity of the situation. When the officers entered the bedroom, they found a woman, Kristen, lying on the bed in a pool of her own blood. A large revolver was on her abdomen, and she had a visible gunshot wound on her chin. At first, it seemed like she had already died, but surprisingly, she moved her hand, and an officer detected a weak pulse and breathing. The officers moved Kristen to the adjacent room to position her on the floor for resuscitation attempts. Despite their efforts, Kristen had died by the time the ambulance arrived, and the medical team confirmed her death. Sergeant Brandon Hotman went outside to inform Colby, Kristen's husband, that she had passed away. Colby repeatedly asked if Hotman was sure, and when he was told the truth, he broke down in tears. However, his behavior and tears seemed insincere, given that just minutes earlier, he had been chatting casually with other patrolmen about video games. At first glance, the scene suggested that she had taken her own life, but experienced detectives quickly suspected that something was amiss. It was the eve of Halloween, and she had been preparing for the celebration, which made her apparent decision to end her life all the more puzzling. The detectives found handmade costume decorations on her vanity and themed treats in the kitchen, including lollipop bats and ghosts, gummy worms, and other sweets. This suggested that she had been looking forward to the holiday, which made her death even more unexpected. She was found nearly undressed, wearing only her underwear, which was unusual. Typically, women take care to present themselves in a way that they would want to be seen, even in death. Furthermore, the method of death, a gunshot to the head, was also uncharacteristic of a woman. This method is often avoided by women due to concerns about disfiguring themselves. Kristen's body was severely damaged. One of the most puzzling aspects of her death was the gun itself. The large revolver would have been difficult for Kristen to handle due to her small size and fragile nature. It would have been hard for her to hold the gun, let alone twist her arm to shoot herself in the chin. The position of the gun also raised questions for the officer, as it was lying on her stomach, pointing sideways. Kristen's husband later explained that after finding her, he too had considered taking his own life. He held the revolver to his temple but then changed his mind and called emergency services, hoping to save his wife. At the scene of the crime, detectives were surprised when the victim's phone, which was sitting on a nightstand, rang with an alarm. It turned out that she had set the alarm to remind herself of plans for the morning, but it seemed that she had changed her mind and taken her own life during the night. This unusual detail raised suspicions, and detectives thought that someone might have staged the scene to look like a suicide. As a result, the victim's husband, Colby, became the main suspect and was asked to come to the police station for questioning. He agreed to go willingly. When Colby arrived at the police station, he seemed upset but not overly distraught. He remained calm and confident as he explained what had happened the previous evening. According to Colby, his wife Kristen, a manager at Walmart who was expecting a promotion, had come home from work and they had played video games together. Then, he went to bed early because he wasn't feeling well. Kristen had gone to the kitchen to finish preparing holiday treats, leaving Colby to sleep. But in the middle of the night, a loud bang jolted Colby awake. The sudden noise left him dazed and disoriented, his ears ringing, and he couldn't see anything in the darkness. When he finally turned on the light, he was shocked to find his wife Kristen lying motionless beside him, her head bleeding severely. Strangely enough, if it's true as stated by Colby, he attempted to revive his wife, but soon realized it was hopeless. He then picked up a revolver, put it to his own head, but ultimately set it back down on her body. He called emergency services and went outside to wait for the police. This sequence of events raises several questions. For example, why did he place the gun on her abdomen instead of disposing of it elsewhere? It's also unclear why he waited outside for the police and medics if he thought his wife might still be alive. In situations like this, people usually try to save the person's life or apply pressure to the wound to stop the bleeding. However, Colby did not attempt to help his wife again, claiming he was in shock. While a police officer was trying to provide first aid before the medics arrived, he did not show any interest in his wife's condition. Instead, he stood outside and casually chatted with a police officer about music and video games. When Colby learned of Kristen's death, he briefly teared up, but quickly composed himself. At the police station, he answered routine questions, including whether Kristen had life insurance, which he denied. However, he mentioned that he was eligible for minor payouts from his time in the armed forces. During the conversation, Colby began boasting about his military accomplishments, claiming to have worked in intelligence and participated in special operations worldwide. Despite sounding credible, Colby's claims were largely false. When asked why he thought Kristen might have taken her own life, he attributed it to her long history of depression, which stemmed from a traumatic childhood and adolescence. He cited her mother's betrayal, her father's death, and her forced relocation to live with an uncle and aunt she had never met before as contributing factors. Colby's words seemed convincing, but experienced investigators sensed he was lying and had possibly rehearsed his story. Despite their suspicions, they had no concrete evidence to charge him with a crime, so they had to release him. Kristen's family was shocked and devastated by her death. Her uncle, aunt, and siblings immediately traveled 500 miles to speak with the police and make funeral arrangements. They strongly believed that Kristen would never have taken her own life, citing her strong religious faith and regular church attendance. According to her family, Kristen was a happy and optimistic person who loved life and had big plans for the future. She had even been working on opening a shelter for homeless animals and had found a property she wanted to lease. Investigations confirmed that Kristen had been planning to rent a new property and was expecting a promotion at work, which she was proud of. She was also preparing for Halloween and had promised to visit her sister for her birthday in November. Her relatives stated that she had no history of depression or mental health issues and did not have any harmful habits. Her family also emphasized that Kristen would never abandon her dogs, which she loved dearly. They suspected that her husband, Colby, might have been involved in her disappearance. They described Colby as a controlling and cruel man who dictated whom Kristen could interact with and would become enraged if she didn't respond to his calls or messages immediately. He prohibited her from contacting her relatives, but she would secretly call them from her husband's home. Visits with her family were infrequent. During her last visit, she confided in them that she could no longer endure the mistreatment and had discussed it with her husband. She warned that if things didn't improve, they would have to separate. The autopsy of Kristen revealed a single bullet wound on her chin, which suggested that the shot was fired while she was on her back with the gun pressed to her head. While it was possible that she could have shot herself, it would have been very difficult to do so. There were no signs of struggle or resistance on her body. The detectives, however, were not convinced. Given Colby's history of controlling behavior, they suspected that he might have been violent towards Kristen in the past. They conducted a thorough examination of Kristen's body, looking for any signs of bruises, abrasions, or scratches that might indicate a history of abuse. Despite their efforts, no internal or external injuries were found, aside from the gunshot wound. The investigation then shifted its focus to Colby's personality, revealing that he was a habitual liar who frequently deceived others and even himself with convincing falsehoods. Colby's story didn't add up. Despite his claims of being in danger and having connections to intelligence, he had no history of being in high-risk situations or working with intelligence agencies. In fact, he had been dishonest with those around him about his music career and income. In reality, his wife Kristen was the primary breadwinner, working hard to support their family. Colby, on the other hand, only played occasional gigs during holidays and spent most of his time playing video games. He had talent, but lacked the persistence and patience to succeed, and his laziness held him back. The police investigation uncovered some information. A search of Colby and Kristen gadgets revealed a revealing look at their lives. Kristen's phone calendar was filled with appointments, from haircuts to meetings with a real estate agent. Meanwhile, Colby's messages showed that he had been flirting with another woman, even while at the police station. He had exchanged messages on a laptop in the living room, raising suspicions about his honesty. A recovered search history also revealed that Colby had been researching life insurance payouts in the event of death shortly before the tragedy. This discovery raised more questions about Colby's motives and potential involvement in the events that unfolded. An investigation revealed that Colby had lied about his financial situation. He had taken out 2 insurance policies on his wife, naming himself as the beneficiary in the event of her death. These policies included military spouse insurance and a standard life insurance policy, with payouts that were much higher than Colby had initially claimed. In fact, he had calculated exactly how much he would receive if his wife died. Despite the suspicious circumstances and Colby's inconsistent statements, the case ultimately hinged on the forensic expert's report. The report concluded that there were no signs of violence on the body, except for a single gunshot wound, suggesting that Kristen may have taken her own life. The case was eventually closed, and Colby received the insurance payouts, nearly $50,000 from the military spouse insurance and over $100,000 from the life insurance policy. On the same day the money was deposited into his account, Colby ordered a life-sized realistic doll from an online store, apparently for intimate purposes. Colby indulged in a lavish lifestyle, buying a new gaming console, an electric guitar, and expensive musical equipment. He spent the rest of the money on fancy clothes and frequent nights out at bars and restaurants, feeling carefree and convinced that he had gotten away with the crime since there was no evidence against him. For nearly 2 years, Colby lived a life of luxury, but in the summer of 2021, a new district prosecutor took office and reopened the investigation into Colby's wife's disappearance. Detectives had approached the prosecutor, convinced that Colby had murdered his wife. They presented evidence, including the restored browser history, Colby's unusual behavior, and his clear motive. After reviewing the case, the prosecutor authorized the reopening of the investigation. In July 2021, Colby was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated homicide and intentionally misleading the investigation. During his arrest, he remained calm and immediately contacted his lawyers, who began working on his defense. Colby's defense team argued that his wife had suffered from chronic depression for many years and that her disappearance was inevitable. They also portrayed Colby as a loving and caring husband, a valorous serviceman, and a devout person, contradicting the detective's suspicions. The prosecution took a unique approach by hiring experienced specialists to create a psychological profile of the deceased and examine her emotional state leading up to the tragedy. This method, known as a psychological autopsy, involved analyzing data from Kristen's phone, social media posts, recent photos, and interviews with her relatives, friends, and colleagues. After months of gathering and analyzing information, the experts reached a clear conclusion: Kristen had no intention of ending her life, given her short-term and long-term plans. The trial and verdict in this complex case were delayed, starting in September 2023, nearly 4 years after the tragedy. Although the defendant had a clear motive, acted suspiciously, and lied during interrogations, the forensic expert's initial conclusion initially worked in his favor. The prosecution had obtained a new report that could potentially change the course of the case. When questioned about the insurance inquiries on his computer, Colby claimed that his wife had likely made them to find out the payout amount. However, the timing of the requests contradicted his statement, as his wife was at work at the time, confirmed by surveillance footage. Colby was also asked about a life-size doll he had purchased shortly after his wife's death, as well as other expensive items. He explained that he couldn't sleep alone and needed something to hold on to, and that he bought the console and guitar to take his mind off his grief. His mother backed up his claims, vigorously defending her son throughout the trial. The psychiatrist's crucial evaluation revealed that Kristen had not intentionally ended her own life. This detailed assessment was instrumental in determining the events surrounding her death. The autopsy report revealed an unusual aspect. The angle at which the bullet entered Kristen's chin was peculiar. The forensic analysis indicated that the bullet was fired from the left side of Kristen, contradicting her dominant right-handedness. This raises questions about whether someone standing on Kristen's left side pulled the trigger or if she shot herself with her left hand. The latter is less plausible considering Kristen was a right-handed individual. This vital evidence raises serious concerns about Colby's potential involvement in Kristen's death. After deliberating the case, the jury unanimously delivered a guilty verdict, finding Colby guilty of all charges. Consequently, Colby received a life imprisonment sentence, eligible for parole after a minimum of 50 years. Notably, Colby refused to accept his guilt, despite being given ample opportunity. Throughout his appeals process, all of his attempts to refute his sentence were ultimately unsuccessful. In the end, no modifications were ever made to Kristen's official cause of death report. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Leanne Tieran. Leanne Tieran was born on September 27, 1984, to Michael Tiernan and Sharon Hawkhead in Bramley. Although her parents divorced shortly after her birth, Leanne remained close to her father. She and her older sister, Michelle, lived with their mother in Leeds, but their father continued to play an active role in their lives. Leanne was also very fond of her grandparents and would often accompany them to church on Sunday mornings. She had a sweet tooth and was affectionately nicknamed Chocolate Chip Niece by an uncle. Leanne was a student at West Leeds High School. She had been diligently studying for her GCSEs. A day out with her best friend, 15-year-old Sarah Whitehouse, was a fun holiday. They planned to go to Leeds for some early Christmas shopping. On Sunday, November 26, 2000, after going to church with her grandmother, Leanne returned home to prepare for an outing with Sarah. She wears a black and white ribbed turtleneck sweater, black pants, and black ankle boots over a blue jacket. She styled her hair in her favorite French style, kissed her mother, and set off to meet Sarah. Leanne and Sarah took a bus to downtown Leeds and spent the afternoon shopping. By late afternoon, they finished their work and boarded the bus back to Bramley. At about 4:50 p.m., they got out of the car and walked to Sarah's house and parted ways. Sarah watched Leanne walk towards Howley Gill, a public footpath that was a shortcut to her house. Even though the path was unlit and went through a wooded area, Leanne felt safe walking because it was still light out. It should have only taken Leanne 20 minutes to get home, but when Sarah called Leanne's house at 5:20 p.m. to chat, she was surprised to hear that Leanne hadn't come home yet. Sharon kept calling Leanne's mobile phone, but she did not answer. At 7 p.m., Sharon reported Leanne missing to the local police station. West Yorkshire Police, led by Detective Superintendent Chris Gregg, launched a large-scale search operation. The terrain is challenging, with more than 700 homes, vacant lots, woods, canals, drainage shafts, and wells to search. The police are determined to find Leanne and bring her home safely. They used helicopters, uniformed police, and search dogs to scour the area, going from house to house. To preserve any potential evidence, trash collection in the area has been suspended. A week later, despite their best efforts, there was still no sign of Leanne. Investigators reconstructed her final activities with the help of her sister Michelle and close friend Sarah. As the investigation unfolded, several witnesses came forward claiming to have seen a suspicious man walking his black and tan dog in the Howley Gill area just an hour before Leanne got off the bus on her way home. The police created a composite sketch of the man, describing him as 5 feet 8 inches with a stocky build, round face, and possible scarring. He was seen wearing a black beanie, a long waterproof coat, and dirty jeans. Police have released this information to the public. As the investigation stalled, the case began to go cold. However, the public continues to show support for Leanne's family, doing everything they can to make her story known. Dad of 3 from Leeds, Sean Clark, even offered a £10,000 reward for any information that could lead to Leanne's safe return. Additionally, Iceland Foods, a supermarket chain, printed Leanne's picture and details on their milk cartons nationwide. As the months passed, investigators searched more than 2,000 homes and outbuildings along Leanne's route home from the shopping district. The police still haven't found Leanne. Her loved ones always hoped that one day she would return home. But 9 months after her disappearance, on August 20, 2001, a man named Mark Bisson was walking his dog in Lindley Woods, a forest near North Yorkshire, when he stumbled upon a mysterious discovery. Initially, it appeared to be a pile of rubbish, but as he looked closer, he discovered a floral duvet wrapped in twine. When removing the rope, Bisson found a body wrapped in 9 large garbage bags. The police were called, and they carefully removed the blanket and bag to reveal the body of a fully clothed young girl. The body was found with its hands bound behind its back with 3 yellow cable ties, and a leather dog collar was tightly secured around its neck. Underneath the black garbage bag covering its head, investigators discovered the decomposing face of a young woman. Using fingerprints, they were able to identify the body as Leanne Tieran. An autopsy later confirmed that Leanne had been strangled to death with a plastic cable tie. The investigation shifted from a missing persons case to a murder inquiry. Authorities believe the killer was likely a local resident. 2 key pieces of evidence support this theory. Leanne's body was found just 16 miles from where she was last seen, and the yellow cable used to bind her hands is commonly used by the British postal system, especially Royal Mail or Parcel Force. The green garbage bags used to wrap Leanne's body were identified as coming from Morrison's, a popular grocery store chain with 2 locations in the area. Investigators collected DNA samples from Leanne's family members, friends, and known sex offenders in the area, hoping to find a match. In addition, a thorough search of the bushland area where Leanne's body was buried was conducted. The investigation into Leanne's death was ongoing, but one thing puzzled detectives: her body was found in an area that had been thoroughly searched before, and it didn't show the usual signs of decomposition after 9 months. Her hair was still styled in the same ponytail with the same hair tie and clip she had when she went missing. The medical examiner's analysis of her cardiac tissue revealed that Leanne was killed on the day she was kidnapped, and her body was stored in a cold environment for months. The killer attempted to dispose of her body by leaving it in a common dump area, wrapped in a duvet, a few weeks before it was discovered. Although the killer tried to hide the body, he accidentally saved a significant amount of forensic evidence and DNA. However, when authorities analyzed the body, they were disappointed to find no DNA evidence of the killer. They then turned their attention to investigating the items found with Leanne's body, hoping to find clues that will help them catch the killer. The investigation found dog hair on Leanne's clothes, leading police to attempt to create a DNA profile of the dog in the hope of identifying the killer. The dog hair was sent to a Texas university that specializes in DNA profiling of purebred pets. Although the university was able to obtain a partial DNA profile, they were unable to match it to a specific dog, so analysis was stopped. A knitted scarf was found around Leanne's neck containing knotted human hair. The hair was submitted for DNA testing, and a DNA profile was successfully created from the small amount of DNA found inside the hair shaft. The police then turned their attention to the dog collar that had been used to wrap a black bin liner around Leanne's neck. The collar was found to have been manufactured by a company called Armitage Leather Products, based in Nottingham. Detectives hoped that if the killer had purchased the dog collar from them, they might be able to obtain his name or address. The police reached out to the manufacturer and requested sales records. After analyzing these documents, investigators contacted more than 220 wholesalers across the UK. Their 112th inquiry proved successful. They contacted a company called Pet Pajamas, based in Liverpool, which revealed that it had sold 3 of the distinctive dog collars in question. Pet Pajamas provided investigators with details of the 3 customers who had bought these items. The detectives started investigating the customers and soon identified a prime suspect, John Taylor from Bramley, near the area where Leanne was last seen. Taylor's name had previously come up during the investigation when Leanne's body was found. At the time, witnesses reported that Taylor was frequently seen in the woods with his dog. By the time investigators prepared to question Taylor, he had already stated that his dog had passed away before Leanne's murder, sparking suspicion that he may have deliberately killed his pet to conceal evidence. At first glance, John Taylor seemed like a regular person. He was a 45-year-old man working as a delivery driver for Parcel Force, a division of the Royal Mail. He had no serious criminal history except for one instance when he stole a suit as a 15-year-old. He was previously married, with the couple having 2 children, a son in 1981 and a daughter in 1983, before they got a divorce in 1996. He appeared to be living a solitary and unassuming life in a modest house on Cockshot Drive, Bramley, Leeds. Taylor's neighbors consider him a normal person, but he enjoys causing pain to animals. He would hunt and torture rabbits, stab foxes, and bludgeon pheasants to death. In 1982, Taylor started breeding dogs and ferrets at his home on Cockshot Drive, which led to a buildup of animal waste. The smell eventually became unbearable for his wife, Janet, who had always taken pride in their home. Janet could no longer tolerate the situation and filed for divorce. Taylor frequently traveled around the country, not for work but to meet women he had contacted online. He often uses the internet to find female friends online and often has sex with them. Investigators later tracked down some of these women through Taylor's phone records and interviewed them. While most described him as harmless, some admitted to having called the police to report him as a suspect after the discovery of Leanne's body. 2 women, in particular, described Taylor as someone who enjoyed violence during intimate encounters. He even told one woman that he had a desire to have sex with her daughter. A former girlfriend of Taylor's ended their relationship due to his fascination with bondage. She reported that Taylor would restrain her hands with cable ties and cover her face with scarves. When questioned by investigators, she described Taylor's method of restraint, which involved using a bundle of cable ties stored in his bedside drawer. He would bind her wrists with 2 cable ties and then connect them behind her back with a 3rd tie. This technique was eerily similar to the way Leanne's body was found, and the details had not been publicly disclosed. 10 months after Leanne's disappearance, Taylor was arrested and brought in for questioning. A warrant was issued for his DNA and a search of his property. The police immediately cordoned off his house on Cockshot Drive and conducted a thorough search of the premises. In the backyard, they discovered a hedge plant, a plum tree, and a poplar tree. Pollen from these plants was found on Leanne's hair, skin, and nasal tract, indicating that she had been at the location before her death. During the search, police excavated the garden and found the remains of various animals, including 28 ferrets buried in a mass grave and the skeletons of 4 dogs. One of the dogs, a tan and black terrier, had a crushed skull. It is possible that Taylor killed his dog to conceal his identity after learning that the police were looking for a suspect with a dog. Forensic tests revealed that the hairs found on Leanne's body matched those of the tan and black terrier. Investigators gathered crucial evidence linking Taylor to Leanne's murder inside the house. A closer examination of the floorboards revealed paint carpet fibers caught on nails, which matched the fibers found on Leanne's body. Additionally, a blood stain belonging to Leanne was discovered under the floorboards. The twine used to tie the bin liners around Leanne's body was identified as part of a unique batch produced by a manufacturer in Devon, specifically designed for making rabbit-catching nets. A matching batch was found in Taylor's home. Further investigation revealed a stash of yellow zip ties in Taylor's house, which were manufactured by an Italian company exclusively for the Royal Mail. As Taylor worked for Parcel Force, a division of Royal Mail, it was easy for him to obtain these ties. A nail in John's kitchen had the same type of garbage bag wrapped around it, adding to the evidence. 3 large freezers were also found on the property, although their significance was not immediately clear. Initially, Taylor denied knowing Leanne or being involved in her murder. However, when giving evidence, Taylor admitted to kidnapping Leanne but insisted her death was an accident. He claimed that Leanne died from a fall that hit her head. According to investigators, Leanne's death did not occur as a result of a fall, as claimed by Taylor. In reality, Taylor attacked Leanne from behind while she was walking alone on the unlit path of Holly Gill. There were no eyewitnesses, but a stifled scream was reported. Investigators concluded that Taylor then strangled Leanne and bound her hands with cable ties, resulting in her death. In 2002, John Taylor, 46, was found guilty of murdering and kidnapping Leanne. He received 2 life sentences and will be eligible for parole after 20 years. After his conviction, investigators discovered that Taylor had committed previous crimes. Once his DNA was added to the police database, they matched him to 2 old assault cases. One assault occurred on October 18, 1988. A 32-year-old woman was attacked while walking to pick up her kids from school on Holly Gill. Taylor was masked and carried a knife. Another attack happened on March 1, 1989, when Taylor entered a Bramley house through force, masked and with a knife. He dragged a 21-year-old mother into her bedroom and attacked her. He also stripped, blindfolded, and gagged her, while her 18-month-old daughter cried in the next room. The investigation into Leanne's murder showed a clear calculation in the disposal of her body. After her murder, Taylor kept her body in his kitchen freezer. In the years following Leanne's case, police conducted a nationwide review of similar cold cases. In 2018, the full extent of John Taylor's heinous crimes came to light when he confessed to a series of vile acts committed against 5 women between 1977 and 1996. One of these incidents involved holding a knife to the throat of a pregnant woman and forcing her to perform a degrading act. Another incident occurred in 1977, just before Christmas, when he assaulted a barmaid. Taylor pleaded guilty to these attacks and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at Wakefield Prison, a maximum security facility notorious for housing infamous and violent offenders. Many questions remain about the extent of Taylor's crimes, including how many more murders and assaults he may have committed and how far back his crimes date. It is also unclear how he managed to evade capture for so long. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Lacy Peterson. Lacy Peterson was born on May 4, 1975, to Sharon and Dennis. However, her parents' marriage was short-lived, and they divorced when Lacy and her older brother Brent were still young. Following the divorce, Lacy's life changed with the introduction of her stepfather, Ron. As a dairy farmer, Ron became a significant influence in Lacy's life, serving as a father figure and helping to raise her. Lacy was a bright and cheerful person, known for her captivating smile and lively personality. She was a social butterfly, always eager to engage in conversations and thrive in social situations. Lacy growing up on a dairy farm, Lacy has a strong connection to nature. She spends a lot of time exploring and enjoying the natural beauty around her. One of her favorite activities was gardening with her mother. This shared hobby would eventually shape Lacy's interests and career path as an adult. Lacy was a student at Thomas Downey High School, where she was a cheerleader and made a lasting impression with her outgoing personality. After graduating, she attended California Polytechnic University, where she studied ornamental horticulture. During her time at Cal Poly, Lacy would often visit a friend who worked at a restaurant in Morro Bay. It was there that she met Scott Peterson, a co-worker of her friend's. Lacy was immediately attracted to Scott and decided to take the initiative by giving him her phone number. Scott quickly responded, and they had an instant connection during their first conversation. They were eager to meet in person, and Scott asked Lacy out on a date. Their first date was a deep-sea fishing trip, but it didn't go as smoothly as they had hoped. Lacy became seasick during the outing, which put a damper on their initial encounter. Lacy and Scott's relationship continued to blossom despite a rocky start. As they grew closer, they decided to take a significant step and move in together. Before meeting Lacy, Scott had aspirations of becoming a professional golfer. But as their relationship deepened, his priorities shifted, and he chose to focus on a career in business instead. After Lacy graduated from Cal Poly in 1997, Scott graduated the following year. Their graduation marked the beginning of an exciting new chapter in their lives. They married on August 9, 1997, in a beautiful ceremony at a resort in San Luis Obispo County's Ayala Valley. Surrounded by friends and family, they exchanged vows and celebrated their love. Following their wedding, Lacy and Scott embarked on a new venture together, opening a sports bar called The Shack in San Luis Obispo, California. Although business was initially slow, they persevered, and over time, they began to attract a steady stream of customers. Weekends at The Shack were always packed. After many years of success, Lacy and Scott made the difficult decision to sell the bar in 2000. Although the bar was a good source of income, they felt it was time to move on and explore new opportunities. After weighing their options, they sold The Shack and moved to Lacy's hometown of Modesto, California. In October 2000, Lacy and Scott bought a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in a desirable neighborhood. After the move, Lacy took a part-time job as a substitute teacher, while Scott worked for a European fertilizer company called Branch. Lacy and Scott's life was thriving, with Lacy excelling in domestic duties, making their home warm and inviting. In 2002, they received the wonderful news that they were going to have a baby, with the due date set for February 10, 2003. They was overjoyed to discover they were having a boy and had already chosen the name Connor. Their happiness was short-lived, however. On December 24, 2002, Scott departed for a fishing trip at the Berkeley Marina, leaving Lacy behind at 9:30 a.m. Scott noticed Lacy was missing after he finished showering. He had previously been fishing and had showered and washed his clothes as soon as he got home. When he couldn't find Lacy, he became worried and contacted her mother and stepfather, Sharon and Ron. However, neither of them had heard from her all day. As the hours passed and Lacy remained missing, Scott and Sharon decided to file a missing persons report with the police around 6 p.m. They stressed to the police the urgency of the situation, explaining that Lacy was 7 months pregnant with their unborn son, Connor. The police began questioning Scott about his activities on the day of Lacy's disappearance. According to Scott, he had gone fishing at the Berkeley Marina, which is about 90 miles from their home in Modesto. However, the police had suspicions of foul play in Lacy's disappearance from the very beginning of their investigation. During the initial search for Lacy, the police were not suspicious of her disappearance. Lacy's family publicly defended her husband Scott, as they had seemed perfect. However, as the investigation continued, police interest in Scott grew. Nearly a month after Lacy's disappearance, a shocking discovery was made about Scott. Investigators discovered that while married to Lacy, Scott had been cheating on Lacy, having a long-term affair with a woman named Amber Fry. Amber Fry first contacted police on December 30, 2002. She told them that she had been having an affair with Scott Peterson, Lacy's missing husband. Amber claimed that she had met Scott on November 20, 2002, and initially believed that he was single. However, Scott had told Amber just 2 weeks before Lacy's disappearance that he was a widower, suggesting he would be spending his first holiday season without his wife. This revelation raised suspicions among the police, who wondered if Scott had already planned to murder his pregnant wife. To gather evidence, the police asked Amber to call Scott while being recorded, hoping to capture a potential confession. The police also informed Lacy's family about Scott's infidelity. After learning about Scott's infidelity, Lacy's family publicly withdrew their support for him. Meanwhile, a massive search effort was underway to find Lacy. The search was a collaborative effort between law enforcement, Lacy's loved ones, and hundreds of volunteers. Over 900 people participated in the search during the first 2 days alone. A police officer working on the case expressed skepticism that Lacy had left her home voluntarily on December 24, 2002. Lacy's disappearance shocked the media, capturing public attention with the story of a pregnant wife who went missing on Christmas Eve. Initially, a $5,000 reward was offered for information leading to her safe return, but as time passed with no leads, the reward was increased to $500,000 to raise awareness and gather information. Posters of Lacy were displayed prominently in Modesto, California, and a friend's husband created a website to help spread the word about her disappearance. On April 13, 2003, a couple walking their dog at Richmond's Point Isabel Regional Shoreline Park made a disturbing discovery in a marshy area of the San Francisco Bay. They found the decomposing body of a male infant. The next day, another person discovered the body of a pregnant woman on the shore of the east side of the bay, about a mile away from where the baby was found. DNA tests confirmed on April 18, 2003, that the bodies were those of Lacy Peterson and her unborn son, Connor. They were buried at Wood Cemetery. The autopsy revealed that the baby had 1.5 loops of nylon tape around his neck and a significant cut on his body. Lacy's autopsy showed that Lacy had 2 cracked ribs, her upper torso had been disemboweled, and her head and limbs were missing. The medical examiner determined that the baby died in the womb and was expelled from Lacy's body after her death. Agents from the FBI and the Modesto Police Department searched the home of Scott and Lacy Peterson, looking for evidence that might link them to Lacy's disappearance. During the search, they found the hair caught in Scott's pliers on his fishing boat. The FBI analyzed the hair and matched it to Lacy's DNA. In addition to the home search, the FBI also investigated Scott's truck and warehouse for any signs of evidence. They also examined Scott's boat, where they found a homemade anchor made with a 90-pound bag of concrete. Scott claimed he used the concrete to repair his driveway, but investigators believed he had actually made multiple anchors, using them to weigh down Lacy's body in the San Francisco Bay. The police identified the bodies found in the San Francisco Bay as Lacy and Connor. This led to Scott's arrest near a golf course. At the time of his arrest, Scott's appearance had changed significantly, as his dark brown hair was now blonde. A search of his vehicle revealed a large amount of cash, $115,000, as well as survival gear, camping equipment, and 4 cell phones. The police also found 2 driver's licenses, one belonging to Scott and the other linked to his brother. This evidence suggested that Scott was planning to escape the state. Scott's father provided an alternative explanation for the driver's license found in Scott's car. According to his father, Scott had borrowed his brother's license to get a discount at the golf course. The father also explained that Scott's car was packed with belongings because Scott was living out of his car to avoid the media attention surrounding his case. A year after his arrest, Scott's trial began in June 2004. During the opening arguments, the prosecution presented its case, claiming that Scott's affair with Amber was the motive for Lacy's murder. The prosecution highlighted Scott's suspicious behavior before and after Lacy's disappearance, including inconsistencies in his alibi. Initially, Scott told police he was fishing on the day Lacy went missing, but later told others he was golfing. The prosecution also pointed out that Scott asked police if they had used cadaver dogs to search a park where Lacy walked their dog, suggesting that Scott was aware of the potential crime scene and trying to cover his tracks. In response, Scott's defense team presented a strong argument. They acknowledged Scott's history of infidelity but argued that it did not necessarily make him guilty of murder. They claimed that Scott would not ruin his life for someone he had only dated a few times. The defense suggested that a possible explanation for Lacy's hair being found in Scott's boat was a previous visit to the marina with Lacy. Other witnesses, including a realtor and a salesman, testified that Scott was actively trying to sell their home and trade in Lacy's car, respectively, in the months following her disappearance. The prosecution presented this evidence as proof of Scott's guilt. Additionally, Amber, Scott's mistress, testified about their affair, and the jury listened to secretly recorded phone calls between they. During Scott's trial, a hydrologist and a tidal expert testified that it was possible for Lacy's body to have been dumped in the area where Scott claimed to have been fishing on the day she disappeared. However, the defense argued that there was not enough credible evidence to link Scott directly to the crime. They proposed an alternative theory, that someone had kidnapped Lacy on Christmas Eve 2002, held her captive until she gave birth, and then disposed of both bodies in the San Francisco Bay. Scott's attorney emphasized that there was no direct evidence connecting Scott to the crime and suggested that other suspects could have been responsible. On November 12, 2004, the jury in California found Scott guilty of 2 counts of murder, first-degree murder for Lacy's death and second-degree murder for the death of their unborn son, Connor. Lacy's murder was classified as first-degree murder with special circumstances due to the involvement of the fetus. Scott's classification made him eligible for the death penalty. After his conviction, the trial's penalty phase began, focusing on determining his punishment. The jury considered his criminal history, aggravating factors, and mitigating factors before unanimously deciding on the death penalty. In August 2020, the California court upheld Scott's conviction but vacated his death sentence, with the judge ordering Scott to be resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As a result, Scott was transferred from San Quentin State Prison, where he had been on death row, to Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California, on the judge's order. In response to Lacy's case, President George W. Bush signed the Unborn Victims of Violence Act into law on April 1, 2004. Lacy's mother and stepfather attended the signing ceremony, standing alongside President George W. Bush as the legislation took effect. This law, also known as Lacy and Connor's Law, aimed to provide legal protection for unborn children in cases where their mothers are victims of violence. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Nancy Loggerquist. Nancy Loggerquist, an 87-year-old woman, was a resident at the Riverside Healthcare Center, where she had lived since 1988. She was born in 1902 in Hamilton, Montana, and she spent much of her life working as an executive secretary. She was also an active member of the Missoula Business and Professional Women's Club before her retirement. She remained single for her entire life and did not have any children. When she passed away, she also did not have many relatives. On July 1, 1990, Nancy was seen sleeping in her bed by a care worker at 3:30 a.m. 1 hour later, at 4:30 a.m., the care worker checked on her room again but found her missing. This caused alarm and prompted 5 staff members on the shift to conduct a search. Despite their efforts, Nancy was nowhere to be found. At 4:41 a.m., the police were notified about her disappearance. It is worth noting that Nancy required around-the-clock assistance as she was unable to walk. Before her disappearance, she had been living an ordinary life at the care home, with nothing in her background suggesting she was at risk. Law enforcement and search and rescue teams arrived quickly at the scene. They searched the home and the surrounding area thoroughly. Since the home was located along the Clark Fork River, police officers in boats also searched the water. At 6:30 a.m., they stopped searching. Authorities found Nancy's body near the riverbank, about 30 minutes downstream from Riverside. She was the victim of a brutal murder involving sexual assault. Afterward, her body was thrown into the water. Two investigators working on the case quickly realized the enormity of the challenge ahead. The discovery of Nancy's body in the water resulted in the destruction of any forensic evidence. Additionally, several key pieces of evidence, including Nancy's missing diaper and the possible murder weapon, were never found, leaving the police with unanswered questions. Detectives theorized that the perpetrator entered and exited Nancy's room through the window facing the river. To do this, they cut the window screen, but left no evidence on the window, windowsill, or anywhere else in the room. It is also puzzling that none of the home's alarm systems were triggered during the entry, and further checks revealed that all alarms were working properly at the time. A key witness reported seeing a man near the crime scene around 4 a.m. He walked through the parking lot of the Missoula Athletic Club, moving away from the river toward East Broadway Street. This individual was approximately 30 to 40 years old, 180 to 200 pounds, and had distinct physical features, including light brown collar-length hair, a mustache, and brown-rimmed glasses. He wore an untucked, striped white and brown t-shirt, which was longer at the back, along with tan shorts and white tennis shoes. The man was not considered a suspect in the case, but the police did want to question him. Nancy had very few relatives, so investigators quickly dismissed a family-related motive for the murder. They shifted their focus to the care home staff. Considering that a staff member would be familiar with the layout and security measures of the facility, leading them to suspect that the murder could be an inside job. This led authorities to concentrate on a particular male staff member. He was eventually cleared, but he left the care home less than a month later for unclear reasons. The police investigation shifted from focusing on a staff member to the possibility of an outside perpetrator. They observed that the home's security measures concentrated on the doors rather than the windows, leading them to speculate that the victim, Nancy, might have been targeted simply because her room faced the river, with no specific motive for the attack. During the investigation, a man named James Bailey was interviewed multiple times, but was eventually cleared as a suspect. Detectives have been reviewing witness statements to look for any other suspicious deaths at the nursing home. Their attention was drawn to the case of 86-year-old Bertha Scott, an Alzheimer's patient who passed away in her bed on May 2, 1990. At the time, her death was attributed to natural causes, as she had heart disease and was frequently restrained at night to prevent her from wandering. However, one nurse reported an unusual detail, a bruise on Bertha's neck, which they found suspicious. Bertha died and was buried without an autopsy being performed. Around the time of her death, staff members at her care home noticed some minor tampering with the windows in the physical therapy room. Based on a nurse's comments, the police decided to exhume Bertha's body to re-examine her cause of death. The police later revealed to her family that she had been raped, then she being strangled to death, leaving them in shock. Bertha's life is very different from Nancy's. Born in Pennsylvania in 1904, and Bertha married 20 years later. 2 years before her death, she moved to Missoula to be closer to her children. Although 4 of her 6 children had passed away before her, she left behind numerous grandchildren. During the medical examination of Bertha's body, semen was found, and the sample was collected. Unfortunately, the sample was too degraded to produce a DNA profile, therefore was unable to help the police identify her killer. Both cases eventually came to a dead end. In 1992, authorities investigated a suspect who was guilty of sexually assaulting a nursing home resident, but he had an alibi since he was in prison during the murders. The same year, Lloyd Chase Allen was also identified as a suspect, but he too was incarcerated at the time. In 2002, the Missoulian reported that several residents of the care home described a mysterious man who would walk the halls at night. There are concerns about the accuracy of the information provided by these residents, so it's difficult to determine whether this man actually existed. As a result, it is that additional unsolved cases exist. Without DNA evidence or further investigation, a resolution to this case seems unlikely. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Kira Stops Pretty Places. Kira Stops Pretty Places was born on August 14, 2001. She grew up in a large family and was a member of the Crow and North Cheyenne Native American reservations in Montana. As a teenager, she was an exceptional athlete, enjoying various sports including basketball, football, running, cross-country, and wrestling. She also had a passion for the arts, performing in plays and singing in her high school choir at Hardin High School. Kira is a kind and compassionate person, always caring and understanding to those she comes into contact with. In her free time, she often cared for stray animals. Her lifelong dream was to become a performer, aspiring to act and sing, with a bright future ahead of her. However, her life was tragically cut short shortly after she turned 18. Kira was last seen in the rural town of Hardin, near the Crow Reservation, on August 24, 2019. She lives with her grandmother, who is named Yolanda Frazier. People did not know where she went, but it was clear that she did not return home. Kira planned to meet her mother the following day for a trip to North Dakota but failed to appear. Her family began to worry when Kira, no responding to texts, didn't answer calls, and was inactive on social media. This was unusual for her, raising concerns that something was amiss. Kira's aunt, Priscilla Bulltail, went to the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office to report Kira's niece missing. However, the office told her that she would have to wait a while before filing a report. This information proved to be false. In Montana, because Kira was under 21 and considered a minor, police were required to conduct an immediate search. Despite this, it wasn't until August 27 that the missing persons report was finally allowed to be filed by Kira's family. Kira's family felt that the police did not take her disappearance seriously, they failing to conduct a search and failing to distribute flyers after she went missing. When she went missing, police initially told Priscilla that Kira was probably just out with friends. Kira had previously struggled with alcohol issues, most notably when she was found unresponsive at school in 2019 due to intoxication and required emergency medical help. After her disappearance, her family waited anxiously for any information about her whereabouts. It wasn't until 5 days later, on August 29, that a jogger stumbled upon Kira's body near a wood pile in a backyard at the intersection of Mitchell Avenue and Rangeview Drive in the Hardin suburb, the same area where she was last seen alive. Notably, the homeowner, who had no connection to Kira, was away at the time of the discovery. Kira's family was not immediately notified that a body had been found, and instead, they learned about the information through social media rumors. As the news spread, they became extremely concerned. Priscilla attempted to visit the scene to identify the body, but was denied access and she couldn't tell if it was Kira or not. Local news outlets were also not alerted to the discovery of the body. Kira's mother and Yolanda visited the local mortuary on September 1 to identify a body, but they were initially told it was not Kira's. As a result, the family continued their search for her. It wasn't until 10 days later that the body was confirmed to be Kira's. The coroner concluded that she died on August 26 and that her death was suspicious, requiring further investigation. However, due to the advanced decomposition of her remains, the exact cause of her death could not be determined. It was also not possible to rule out asphyxiation as a cause of death. Following Kira's body discovery, her family urged law enforcement to investigate her death. However, the family soon encountered resistance from Terry Bullis, the county coroner and owned the local funeral home Bullis Mortuary. Terry informed Kira's mother, Geraldine, on September 12 that her daughter's remains would have to be cremated in order for them to be returned to the family. This went against the family's cultural beliefs and also meant that no further examinations of the body would be possible. Moreover, the family had chosen the Dahl Funeral Home to handle the funeral arrangements, but Terry forced them to use his business, Bullis Mortuary Funeral Home. To the family's dismay, Kira was cremated before her other relatives could even arrive in Hardin. On September 14, the family located the site where Kira's body was discovered with the help of nearby relatives. A few days earlier, they had tried to visit the area, but were unable to, as the scene was no longer cordoned off and there were no boundaries to where the body was discovered. They met Jason Cummings, the neighbor who had found Kira's body. He told them that he had suggested to the police to charge her phone so they could contact the family. Unfortunately, it seemed the police had ignored his suggestion. Jason also questioned the authorities for not sealing off the crime scene, causing evidence to be destroyed. 5 days after Kira went missing, on September 19, her family contacted the media to raise awareness about the case. However, they were surprised to discover that local news outlets, including the Billings Gazette, were unaware of the situation. The Gazette said it called the sheriff's office daily for updates on the cases, but they were not notified about Kira's case. On the same day, Kira's mother, Geraldine, along with Kira's father, Alan, met with Captain Mike Fuss from the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office. They questioned Captain Fuss about why he had not contacted them or returned their calls. Captain Mike explained that he had been preoccupied with other cases. When asked why the crime scene had not been sealed off, Captain Mike stated that according to protocol, if investigators arrived at the scene before uniformed officers, sealing off the scene was not necessary. However, if officers arrived first, the scene would be sealed off. Geraldine and Alan also inquired about Kira's phone, asking why law enforcement had not charged it to examine her recent communications. Captain Mike seemed surprised that the family knew about this detail and explained that the battery was dead, so they did not attempt to use it. However, Kira's family countered that the authorities could have charged the phone to access for recent activity. They initially claimed that not even the FBI could gain access to the phone's contents. Captain Mike reported that Kira had apparently died from alcohol poisoning. However, her family's offer of a $5,000 reward for any information about her death. Mike's response was unexpected and surprising, revealing a clear expression of anger. Additionally, Mike revealed that the original investigator, Jeremy Middlestead, had resigned from the case, citing that he couldn't handle it. A number of new developments occurred during this time. Kira's family was interviewed by law enforcement for the first time, and they also met with the Bighorn County Attorney, J. Harris. Jay disclosed that the coroner, Terry Bullis, had a potential conflict of interest due to his roles as the owner of a funeral home business and the county medical examiner. Jay noted that under Terry's leadership, many deaths had been rapidly attributed to exposure to alcohol and natural causes. However, when the family sought answers to their questions, Jay was short-tempered and provided little clarity. On the 23rd, Kira's family received notice that her missing person report had not been filed and that her name was not in the missing persons database. A week later, the FBI declined to take the case, stating they required more evidence that Kira was murdered on the reservation. Notably, shortly before Kira's disappearance, She recorded a video of her 15-year-old wheelchair-bound younger brother being beaten by several police officers and shared it on social media. The incident involved deputies from the Bighorn County Sheriff's Office, resulting in disciplinary actions against the officers involved. However, one of the policemen present at the scene where Kira's body was found was said to be a policeman involved in the beating. This has raised suspicions that the police involved in Kira's death chose not to investigate, possibly to retaliate against her for her attempts to hold them responsible for her actions. 2 years after Kira's death, new information surfaced in August 2021. 4 witnesses came forward with accounts of the incident that led to her death. Their statements are not entirely consistent, but they generally agree on what happened. The witnesses reported that an argument took place outside a house on Rangeview Drive around 3 a.m. on August 26, 2019. Kira was involved in the argument with 3 other individuals, a 17-year-old girl, a 19-year-old woman, and a 23-year-old man. It was claimed that Kira had been at the house earlier, and one of the occupants had bought her alcohol. At the time of her death, her blood alcohol level was 0.149. The argument prompted a nearby resident to set off their car alarm, hoping the noise would cause the group to leave. And the group dispersed in different directions. Kira was last seen heading towards the area where her body was later found. Additional information was also revealed in the new report. Forensic analysis found no foreign DNA under Kira's fingernails. Furthermore, it was discovered that Kira had been diagnosed with asthma shortly before her disappearance. The case remains unsolved, and the authorities are still seeking information.